Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our meeting today of the Commission on the State of Hate. I want to welcome all the commissioners back and our guests and call this meeting to order at 12:32 p.m. on Wednesday, February 1st, 2023. And we'll start with a roll call to make sure we have quorum. You're muted, Alec.
Thank you. Chair Roybal.
Present.
Commissioner Shea.
Present.
Commissioner Cuellar.
Present.
Commissioner Dembski.
Present.
Commissioner Filer.
Present.
Commissioner Levin.
Present.
Commissioner Salcedo.
Present.
Commissioner Sinar.
Present.
Commissioner Suthers.
Present.
Thank you. A quorum has been established. Again, I want to welcome you to this meeting on the Commission on the State of Hate. And as we welcome everyone to our meeting today, I want to just start with some thoughts. We thought it was important that we address the unspeakable pain that so many of the communities that we serve are experiencing because of the tragedies of the recent weeks. We know that much of our state is in mourning following what happened in Half Moon Bay and Monterey Park, as well as the horrific killing of Tyre Nichols in Memphis. Regardless of what police investigations determine regarding the shootings in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay, the broader AAPI and Latino, Latina, Latinx communities in our state are experiencing this tragedy in the context of an increase in hate incidents and hate crimes. We also know that while Mr. Nichols was killed by police in Tennessee, the video and reports demonstrating the gruesome violence to which he was subjected have terrorized Californians and reminded us of the importance of addressing the documented increase in hate violence targeting Black Californians. On a more personal note, the tragedy in Monterey Park happened just 15 minutes from where I grew up in La Puente, California. And so my heart is with all the communities in California that are mourning and recovering from these tragic incidents. One of our commissioners, Commissioner Cynthia Che, has been working directly with communities and families in Half Moon Bay through her work as co-executive director of Chinese for Affirmative Action. And we want to recognize and thank her for her work. And Commissioner Che, I would love to give you the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, Commissioner Roybal, for the invitation to share our perspectives and appreciation to those who reached out with expressions of care. I am mindful that today is Black History Month, and today is the day that the family of Tyre Nichols is laying their loved one to rest. And may we use this time to call for meaningful change and action. So I wanted to start there because the pain and suffering of the Black community is deep within our hearts. I think, as many of you know, we were expecting to celebrate and rejoice with our friends and family in the new year, especially after coming out of an extended period of a rise in anti-Asian hate incidents, some of which included violence. The horrific tragedies of Half Moon Bay and Monterey Park have really broken our hearts. I want to remind us that today is February 1st, 32 days into 2023, and there have been 53 mass shootings in the United States. We grieve with all the victims, survivors, and their loved ones. It's a reminder that, we don't have to live this way. We shouldn't have to. And it's a reminder that the work that we're doing to create trauma-informed systems and care for all our communities that are disproportionately impacted is ever so important. We have to recognize that our communities have experienced multiple forms of harm and violence and that it's rooted in systemic oppression, white supremacy, colonialism, misogyny. I wanted to speak very directly about the situation in Half Moon Bay because I had spent some time there with the local communities. This past week, I've been so inspired by the farm worker community serving organizations who have, in the wake of such a crisis, have come together to address the immediate and long-term needs of the victims and survivors of this mass shooting. Many of the Asian serving organizations have joined forces because of the limited language and culturally competent care that exists in that region. And it's been a beautiful expression of solidarity where we've found comfort and strength by working with one another. And so right now, the work that we're doing is really identifying those who need immediate help. There's a lot of rapid response coordination happening, including raising funds for individuals. And we have a much broader definition of those impacted beyond the deceased families and survivors of the mass shooting, because so many have lost their homes, their livelihood. And I do want to really thank Deputy Director Monroe, who reached out immediately with offers of direct services and support. We'll be dealing with this for the days, weeks, months, and years to come. And I think through this, we'll learn more about, the work that needs to happen in our state. And I think also the reminder that the farm worker population, a largely invisible population, we've known about the existing exploitation and harm. And we hope that this tragedy will shed light on the systemic level change work that we need to do. And I think that that is the best way that we can honor those that we've lost to this tragedy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Che, for all of those words. Very important reminders and about the work ahead. Thank you. And thank you for your work. I'd also like to recognize the many community-based organizations that have been working tirelessly with communities affected by these acts of violence, including Asian Americans Advancing Justice Southern California. AAPI Equity Alliance has created a resource guide for communities in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay, available at Stop AAPI Hate, that we also want to lift up. We will send the link to these resources in the chat. In addition, of the Civil Rights Department's Community Conflict Resolution Unit, who will be speaking with us later in the meeting, the unit has been fulfilling its mandate to support communities experiencing tension by helping to connect community-based organizations with other local, state, and federal agencies that can provide relevant support services to victims, victims' families, and the community. Many of the communities in need of resources have experienced discrimination or other challenges in accessing resources in the past. We will also put a link in the chat to resources on the department's website. And finally, we'd like to remind everyone that if you feel you are a victim of a hate crime or incident, you can contact the California versus Hate resource line to report the incident and be connected with resources. That link will also be in the chat. Personally, I just want to welcome everyone. I am excited to be chair and to be the facilitator of these meetings. And I want to welcome the public who are joining us. There'll be opportunities for public comment throughout our meeting today. Before I get to review the agenda, I just want to remind everyone that the agenda and attachments for this meeting can be found on the Commission's website, which we will also put in the chat. When you hit that link, you can click on meetings and agenda and click on the links in the upcoming events table. Again, we'll put that website in the chat. As a reminder, please visit the Commission website and sign up for the listserv if you haven't done so already to receive announcements from the Commission, including notices of our meetings. So we welcome you to use that as a resource. I also want to review quickly the public comment process that we will use for all of our Commission meetings. As a reminder, this Commission is a public body. And an important part of being a public body is hearing from the public. To that end, this meeting and all future meetings of the Commission will be open to the public, and there will be opportunities for public comments during the meetings. To keep an orderly meeting, please make sure to comment only on the agenda item under consideration. If you have comments that are not specifically related to an agenda item, please save your comment for agenda item 18 today, titled Public Comment on Items Not on the Agenda. If you would like to submit a written public comment, you may do so by emailing the Commission at csh@calcivilrights.ca.gov. We will monitor this channel throughout the meeting. If you submit a written comment that pertains to an agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it when the public comment portion of that agenda item is open and before any vote. If the comment is not about a specific agenda item, we will read it aloud or summarize it at the end of the meeting during the public comment on items not on the agenda. If you would like to speak at the meeting to deliver your public comment, you will have the opportunity to do so during the public comment portions of the meeting. You may request to speak on an agenda item by raising your hand on Zoom. If you're joining on a computer, you can raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. If you are on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. During the public comment portion, we will call on attendees who raise their hands to allow them to unmute and deliver comments. In the interest of time, public comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. All written comments will be sent to the commissioners at the end of the meeting. Well, that was a lot to say. So again, that information is on the screen. So we welcome public comment during those portions of the meeting. I'd now like to review our agenda today. We'll send a link to a link to the agenda in the chat. Our agenda today will be approving the minutes. We'll be hearing a report from the California Civil Rights Department. We'll be having an informational presentation and discussion about what we mentioned earlier, the Community Conflict Resolution Unit. We'll also have a informational presentation of the existing law regarding hate activity. We'll have a discussion about the definition of a hate crime with respect to the Commission's work. Item 9, we will have a discussion and action regarding the vice chair duties and a proposed addendum to the Commission on the State of Hate Policy Manual. We will talk about the Commission meeting schedule, and then we'll have updates from all of our subcommittees. We'll have some time for Commission member announcements. Again, we will have a public comment period for items that are not on the agenda. We'll discuss future agenda items, and then we will adjourn. We may not take the entire balance of time. We'll also take breaks during our time together today. So with that, let us move into our first action item on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes. It was attachment B for the commissioners. Commissioner Filer.
So moved.
I'll
A
second.
motion from Commissioner Filer. Is there a second?
I'll second.
I had
Second
a
by
correction
Commissioner
for the
Salcedo.
minutes before we vote.
Yes. Do you have a correction, Commissioner Damsky?
I do. I noticed that the adjournment time was left blank at the end of the minutes.
Thank you. Deputy Director Watts, do you have the correct adjournment time to add to the minutes?
I can take this as an action item to correct that.
Great, thank you. Are there any other corrections, edits, comments before we move to public comment on the minutes?
No corrections, but I just want to acknowledge the well thought and it's very descriptive, the minutes. So I want to appreciate the people who did this. Thank you.
They are very thorough, Commissioner Salcedo.
Yes, that's what I meant to say. Thorough. Yes.
They are very thorough.
Well
Thank
put
you.
together.
Thank
Yes,
you for
thank you.
compiling those. If there are no other comments from the commissioners, I will open it up to public comment. Are there any written or verbal public comments?
No public comment.
Thank you so much. No public comment. We'll move to a vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the minutes are. Thank you. Deputy Director Watts, did we need to do a roll call vote on that, or was what we did fine and appropriate?
We could consider it a consent item, but just to be safe, why don't we just go ahead and go through that?
Great. Will you call the roll, please?
Great. Did we have a motion in a second?
Yes.
Okay.
Moved by Commissioner Filer, seconded by Commissioner Salcedo.
Great. Thank you. Chair Roybal.
Aye.
Chair Commissioner Che.
Aye.
Commissioner Cuellar.
Aye.
Commissioner Damsky.
Aye.
Commissioner Filer.
Aye.
Commissioner Levin.
Aye.
Commissioner Salcedo.
Aye.
Commissioner Sinar.
Aye.
Commissioner Suthers.
Aye.
Okay, that's 9 ayes.
Great. Thank you very much. The minutes are approved. Let's move on to agenda item 5, which is a report from the Civil Rights Department, and I will turn it over to Director Kevin Kish. Director Kish.
Thank you, Chair Roybal. This is a moment that we have to update commissioners and the public on other initiatives or activities of the department. Of course, this body has its own mission and purpose, but many of the initiatives of the department touch on or impact or influence the work that we're doing here. So today, I am only going to report on 2 updates from the past month. The first is that in January of this year, we filed the first state lawsuit enforcing legal protections for housing choice voucher holders. The housing choice voucher program is often called Section 8. And 2 years ago, the law in California changed to protect people who hold vouchers from being discriminated against as they seek housing. The voucher program is a major tool to increase housing security in our state. And for the administration and for the department, it's unacceptable that if someone receives federal assistance to access housing, that they then be turned away from housing for discriminatory reasons, solely because they hold the voucher. In the past 2 years since the law went into effect, we have held informational webinars. We've produced Know Your Rights documents for both tenants and landlords. We've resolved dozens of complaints under the new law. We've sent compliance letters to housing providers who post discriminatory advertisements, saying things like no Section 8. This is the first litigation that we've initiated to enforce the law. We've now moved into the phase of litigating to ensure that the protections of the law are real for people who have housing assistance in California. So I'm proud of our team for taking this step. I also wanted to announce that as of this morning, our 2023 paid data reporting portal is live and functioning on our website. 2 years ago, the legislature created an obligation for large California employers to report demographic and pay data to the Civil Rights Department. Each year, this is an annual obligation. And this year's reporting is now live. So large employers can report their demographic and pay information to us through the website. There's detailed FAQs and technical guidance before this year's deadline, which is in May. And the purpose of this law, of course, is to increase pay equity, to encourage employers to assess any disparities that they discover along the lines of race, gender, and ethnicity, the categories contemplated by the law, and then to make information about pay available to the government so that we can assess that and consider it as we use our resources to consider how best to enforce California's Equal Pay Act. So I'm proud of our team for getting that launched this morning. Those are the two updates that I'm going to give today, but I believe my colleague Becky Monroe may have others, so I will turn it to her now.
Thank you. I have a few updates I wanted to provide from the Community Conflict Resolution Unit work that we've been doing over the last month. Again, I will keep it to a minimum because you're going to be hearing from the fantastic team that makes up the Community Conflict Resolution Unit. But I think this goes to what you were hearing from Commissioner Che and what Chair Roybal talked at the beginning. And I think it's just that we recognize our mandate to help communities address tension associated with discrimination certainly extends to responding to some of these crises. And the reason is that we know these are the very same communities that have been confronted discrimination and accessing resources and support, and that have seen a documented increase in hate incidents and hate crimes. And that is true for the API community in our state, as well as the Black community. I think it's important that we recognize that and figure out how we can provide resources and support. So some of the work we've been doing is trying to, in terms of being a resource to the NGOs that are on the ground and doing this work, making sure that we are doing our part to coordinate state resources, trying to help connect the dots so that victims and victim service agencies aren't left to do that on their own. We are continuing to try to sort of connect on sort of very immediate needs about sort of accessing the immediate needs that somebody would need in the aftermath of a horrific shooting like this, while also sort of keeping an eye towards longer term needs and making sure that we provide the resources and support the state can provide as a state in the short term, while knowing that we have an obligation to be in this for the long term, to address some of the underlying issues that may come up through and what we may hear as people try to navigate these resources and support. So the main thing I wanted to do, and I think on behalf of my colleagues, is really lift up the extraordinary, and I'm using acronyms, I'm going to say the extraordinary non-governmental organization, community-based organizations in our state. There are extraordinary men and women right now working across the state who are trying to meet the needs of people. They are stepping outside of what they normally do. They are doing whatever they can to support the communities that they have been serving for a long time. And so I think, I guess I would just say as a state, we are incredibly grateful to be working in and among so many extraordinary community leaders. And we owe them a debt of both gratitude and making sure that we get them the support they need as well. I will then move. I wanted to give some updates on California versus Hate, the resource line and network. I had the opportunity to share with this group a little bit about the resource line. It is up and running. Again, 833-8-NO-HATE is the phone number. People can also access it through our website. And I think that we're going to provide those links shortly in the chat. What I want to emphasize, again, you can call this line if you have been confronted with an act of hate or discrimination. You do not have to know if you are a victim of a hate crime or a hate incident. You just need to know that you think you've been targeted for hate and need support. If you want access to law enforcement, we can help explain how that works. If you don't, you can still call and get support. And so we want to make sure that we let people know that resource is available now. We are thrilled now to be working with a fantastic outreach and marketing firm that's going to help us get the word out across the state. One note I wanted to say is that we are sort of in this soft launch period, meaning we are asking for input and support. Input on how we're providing support. So if you go to our website, and it is currently still being updated based on what we're hearing from advocates, and you have questions or concerns, you can go to stophate@calcivilrights.ca.gov. You can email us there with any specific comments or questions or concerns. So I wanted to put that out there. We are still in the phase where resources are being provided, but we recognize we need to hear directly from the community-based organizations and from advocates and others about what we can do better before the official hard launch in the spring. I also, along those lines, we have been trying, both through our work with CREW as well as the work with California versus Hate, to make sure we're doing a better job of working across state agencies. And so I wanted to highlight a couple of things for our partners at CDSS. They have Stop the Hate grants. They have new grants that are available for community-based organizations. They are up on their website, and we're going to provide a link to get access to that information. And then secondly, the State Library, which again, I think I'm thrilled to know that the State Library is also engaged in this work, but the State Library provides ethnic media grants through a Stop the Hate program as well. They, next week, will be providing additional opportunities for ethnic media outlets to get those resources. So we wanted to make sure you knew about that. And I think those are my main updates for now. So thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Director Monroe. Anything else, Director Kish?
Not for me, thank you.
I just want to echo what Commissioner Che said earlier to you, Deputy Director Monroe, about being engaged with the community within hours of what happened in Monterey Park, and keeping folks informed. So thank you for all of your work and being a true partner to groups on the ground. I think all of us appreciate that very much. Let's move to our next presentation, which is from the Community Conflict Resolution Unit. And I want to welcome three members of the unit who are going to do the presentation, Marquez Equilibria, Gregory Mann, and Christina Texera. Welcome.
Good afternoon, commissioners, and thanks for having us. My name is Gregory Mann, and I'm an attorney with the Civil Rights Department now for over 13 years, mostly in the legal department, but we just moved over when we started the Community Conflict Resolution Unit. I'll be starting the presentation today, and then I'll pass it over to my colleagues. We can go to the next slide, please. Quick overview of the Civil Rights Department. We were created in 1959 as a division of the Fair Employment Practices. In 1980, we became an independent agency, and the name was changed to the Department of Fair Employment and Housing, the DFEH, which most people remember. And last year, we became the Civil Rights Department in recognition of all the different statutes that we enforce. It's not just about employment and housing, it also includes human trafficking, discrimination, public accommodations, and many, many statutes. We investigate, most people know the Civil Rights Department as an enforcement agency where we investigate administrative complaints of discrimination that individuals, groups file with us. And in our legal department, which brings civil claims to enforce the law. So we do a lot of investigation and prosecution. We also facilitate mediations of those administrative complaints and civil complaints. And we engage in a ton of outreach now of education as well as capacity building to help support locals as we're doing right now with these unfortunate shootings. We can move to the next slide, please. The overall mission of the department is to protect the people of California from unlawful discrimination in employment, housing, and public accommodations, and from hate violence and human trafficking. And I just described how we do that with a lot of investigation and prosecution and then mediation of complaints. But the Community Conflict Resolution Unit, that's what I'm part of and what we're talking about. We're not a part of the enforcement aspects of the department. We don't really deal with those individual complaints that people file. We're not associated with the civil complaints that legal files. We're about the community, and we address issues when the community is having conflict. And our mission is to promote peaceful relations by assisting communities that are experiencing fear, conflict, or tensions relating to discriminatory practices, hate incidents, or hate crimes that have a community impact. So again, we're very focused on the community, not enforcing the law, but getting involved in situations where litigation may not be the best answer, might not even be an option. Certainly traditional litigation wouldn't be the way to go in a lot of community conflict situations. So that's when we get involved and try to work with the local community groups to help them with community conflicts. Next slide, please. Although the statutory authority for our unit has existed since 1980, it was just this fiscal year that we finally got funding in July to create the unit. And we have funding for 3 years. And we just started in October putting together the infrastructure of the unit. But we're already out there meeting with local groups every day, creating partnerships and creating education and training materials. We really hit the ground running and we're open for business now. So that's why we're here making this presentation, so folks understand who we are, what we do. And to talk more about that, I'd like to pass it to my colleague, Christina Texera.
Thanks so much, Greg. We can go ahead and move to the next slide. Like Greg mentioned, my name is Christina Texera. I use she, her pronouns, now part of the Civil Rights Department, previously the Civil Rights Manager at the California Department of Social Services, and prior to that, a legal services attorney with California Rural Legal Assistance. Very happy to be speaking to you all today, commissioners, colleagues, and members of the public. So to talk a little bit about our jurisdiction or our authority, to build off of what Greg mentioned, our services, which my other colleague will talk about, must be requested or initiated by communities or a state or local body. We'll talk about what that means in just a moment. But our services do have to be affirmatively requested. Now, we can conduct targeted outreach, but we do need an ask from the community. We want to make sure that communities are ready to receive services. Certainly, we understand, particularly now in the wake of some of the incidents that have been mentioned, that communities have various and immediate needs, which may not include resolution of large or systemic conflict. Certainly, the services that we provide have to be related to community disputes or disagreements or difficulties. That sounds very broad, and it is. We have a wide berth to get in there in communities and find out what's happening and be able to help. We want to be able to respond organically to the various needs of communities. Folks have a lot of intersecting identities, and so one size does not fit all, certainly. And the community conflict has to arise from discriminatory practices that threaten peaceful community relations or impair the rights of persons in those communities. Now, we in California are very fortunate because there are many protected bases here in California. So we would be able to provide services to folks who fall into any of those categories, or like I mentioned, with intersectionality more than those. Can we move to the next slide, please? Now, what is community or state or local body mean, right? And so that's what we'll talk about now. And you'll see a list here. It's not an exhaustive list. Certainly, we can assist folks above and beyond this, but an idea of the kind of folks that we might work with. Community groups, whether that's a more formalized structure or an informal collection, nonprofit organizations or community-based organizations, certainly other government agencies. That could also mean local government, could mean elected officials. Educational institutions from preschool all the way up through colleges and universities. Demonstration groups or tribal groups, human relations commissions, certainly law enforcement, advocacy groups, and any other persons who are directly impacted by a community conflict. So again, a very wide berth here in terms of who we can work with. Can we move to the next slide, please? So you've heard about our history, our authority, our jurisdiction, who we work with. So now a little bit about how we conduct that work. So a couple of really key pieces here in terms of our standards of practice. We are a neutral and impartial resource. So we don't act as advocates for any side in a particular conflict. Allows us to be more agile and allows for trust to be built with various different parties. All of our services are confidential, and that's from the request all the way through service provision and closure of a matter. So every aspect of that is confidential, which again is intended to build trust. And certainly we want to keep people safe. We understand that sometimes community conflict means safety concerns. And you've heard Greg speak a little bit about this third point, but something to emphasize is that we don't conduct investigations or bring lawsuits. We don't refer complaints to our department or any other state agency or governmental agency. Again, that's part and parcel of being neutral, being confidential, and being able to build trust, and being sort of separated from the enforcement arms of our department. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Marquez to talk a little bit about what we do.
If we can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you all. My name is Marquez Equilibria, and also very, very happy to be here as the third member of the Community Conflict Resolution Unit. As Greg mentioned, brand new unit. So we started in October and hitting the road very, very quickly. So in terms of the services that we do and how we conduct the work, we have 5 areas of service summarized here. The first one is designing conflict resolution processes. That means putting together a process to address a problem to assist communities. That could be, let's say, a city experiences hate and they want to do dialogues. How do you do that? They don't have experience. They want us to help them put together, what that might look like. But if you want a perfect example, we're assisting you all in your community engagement processes, and in terms of what those listening sessions, those community forums might look like, that is a perfect example of what we do, is to help you all put those processes in place to make them as most effective as possible. Facilitating community engagement processes. So we can facilitate processes, meetings to help, groups address a situation. So again, in working with you all to kind of try and solve a problem, how do we reach, various people? How do we put together the meetings? And that goes hand in hand with technical consultations, which is the fourth one there. Technical consultations can really be something as quickly as a 15-minute phone call where a police chief or a school superintendent calls us and says, hey, something happened in our school or in our city, and here's what we're thinking about doing. Can you spot any red flags? Can you provide us with any feedback? We don't want you all here, but we just kind of want some feedback. Can you give that to us? Yeah, it can be a quick 15-minute phone call, but it can be a months-long process to assist a community or a group to put together various processes to address a problem, to address issues of hate, to address, police community relation tensions. So to kind of go back, we also have education and training. So among our goals is to develop training products to assist with capacity building. As many of you know, there are human relation commissions throughout the state of California, and many of them are volunteer-based. Sometimes they face issues for the first time in their community, and the idea behind providing and developing training products is to assist them in responding to a situation quickly and effectively. And lastly, we have on there mediating community disputes. So when those situations arise where the parties request for mediation, we can provide that service as well. Next slide, please. And these are additional examples of what community conflict can look like. So mediating conflict within community groups living in the same neighborhood after a hate or bias-related incident, with demographical changes or with issues of hate, various issues can happen. Many parties are significant, from law enforcement to, you know, community-based organizations, and trying to convene various groups to solve a problem is part of, you know, what we can do and how we can offer them some assistance. De-escalating tensions between communities and law enforcement. There are various aspects of like, say, a critical incident, which creates very specific needs up front to de-escalate tensions, address certain issues. Sometimes you have various protests and demonstrations where you could have an escalation with police. So to try and do tone setting and bring best practices with community groups, with law enforcement, to help them work together to lower tensions and to also identify long-term solutions and processes to have discussions to create community input so that law enforcement can make changes based on that community input. So again, that would be another example in how we can become involved. Facilitating dialogues between nonprofit organizations and local government to ensure meaningful access to marginalized communities. So there can be situations where, you know, let's go back to issues of hate or it could be, like, say, bullying in schools, and communities or schools do not know how to go about addressing a situation. We can assist a school district and or a public body with trying to figure out what would be the best way to sort of convene all the right bodies and stakeholders to address concerns, community concerns. We have, of course, human relation commissions, as I've mentioned before. How do you help them in developing inclusive community engagement policies? Sometimes, you know, after being virtual for so long, now they're starting to get involved on the ground and having meetings with their communities. We had this outreach meeting not so long ago with a commission that was discussing locations, trying to be out there with the community. Sometimes the community, it's really hard for them to come to where they're having in-person meetings. There are challenges to that, the time, the place. You know, cities and counties can be large. So if you want to be inclusive, how can you do that and ensure that their concerns are heard through access? So we could certainly work with them among, you know, other things that we can do for them. We can also provide technical assistance and consultations to schools, educational institutions to address hate-related incidents among students and staff. Social media has allowed students and adults to post things that get them into trouble, that become very, very controversial. So we could certainly work with a school to help them address those situations. Next slide, please. And of course, you all know of some of the other CRD initiatives. We can, you know, just skip through this. As you know, we have California versus Hate, which Becky is our leader, and she's provided some wonderful input, and she's also on the call so that she could provide more information on that during her report. But next slide, please. The next one is on you all. The prior slide was on the commission. So just to show you that when we do our outreach meetings, we also like to share information about California versus Hate and about the Commission on the State of Hate, to let the community know that California is doing a lot, and the California Civil Rights Department has, you know, 3 great efforts under it working together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gregory, Christina, and Marquez. I want to just hold for a second on this on discussion around this presentation, because I know Commissioner Damsky has a hard stop at 2 p.m. And so what I want to do is come into the go into Deputy Director Monroe's presentation with Commissioner Damsky providing some context, get through that as much of that conversation and discussion as possible, and then we'll come back to that. Is that okay with everyone?
Mhm.
Great. Thank you to the Community Conflict Resolution Unit staff for sticking around for a little bit. Damsky,
Thank
it
you.
would be great if you could, this came up in your and Commissioner Souther's subcommittee, and so if you could provide some context before Deputy Director Monroe does her presentation.
Yes, certainly. In the first meeting of our subcommittee on making recommendations to law enforcement, Commissioner Southers and I were having a discussion about how exactly are we defining hate crimes. And we thought it would be a useful conversation for the entire commission to have, so that we're all working on a common starting point. So that's the introduction to this, this part of this discussion.
Thank you. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Commissioner Damsky, for this question. I think it's, I've been doing work around hate incidents and hate crimes for many years, and I think it's one of the key questions that we often skip over. So I'm really grateful for this question. I can go to the next slide. I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about today. And I would also encourage, I know we're going to have a conversation afterwards. Deeply aware that there's a law professor among the commissioners. So if there's something that I bring up that you have questions about or want to raise, I would encourage you to do so. Just wanted to explain, we're going to talk about how hate crimes are defined under California law, and specifically for our commission. If you look at the statute that created this commission, it says that hate crime will have the same meaning as the penal code definition, which is the criminal code definition in California. That said, the other part of our mandate, of your mandate, includes additional work that requires understanding what hate incidents and hate crimes are. So first, I'm going to talk about what is a hate crime defined under law, give a very clear definition that we have from the penal code. Secondly, I'm going to just give a brief introduction to hate crimes under federal law. And again, I know Commissioner Levin is deeply familiar with this space. It is not something we're going to spend a lot of time on, but I think it's important because, again, it gets to the sort of perhaps unintentional richness of Commissioner Damsky's question. What is a hate crime? The definition under federal law can also, there's a lot of similarities, but there are some things that we need to keep in mind with respect to complexities. So I'll quickly talk about that. Then I'm going to talk about hate incidents. And I want to give a definition of a hate incident, understanding there is not a definition in our code. There is not a definition. If you look at the prosecutor's guide, for example, for California, there's not one definition, but I'm going to propose one that I think is a working definition that we have been using in our work that I think would work for you. And my hope is would also respect what we've been hearing from community-based organizations, especially over the last few years, about the need to address not only crimes, but also incidents. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the Ralph Act, which is something that's unique to California in terms of civil remedies for people targeted for hate. And this is connected to hate incidents. It's providing an example of what we can offer. So as you as commissioners think about where are the gaps, I want you to know where we in California do have some additional options for people. What can a person do if they're targeted for hate? I will quickly move through that, but I know as commissioners, as you're thinking about all of the different work that you're doing, that's something that's top of mind. So I just want to go through that and just recognize that there are many opportunities to increase support for people targeted for hate under the definition that we use for hate crime or hate incident. So I will go to the next slide, please. And, a hate crime, I'm giving you the penal code definition. And again, I want to refer you back to the statute that created this commission, which says that for purposes of this section, hate crime means what you see here with 422.55, which is essentially under California law, a hate crime is a criminal act. So there's a criminal act that is committed because of one or more of the following actual or perceived characteristics of the victim. And then I think, as you heard from my colleague Christina, in California, we actually have sort of broader protections than many other states. So I think it's important to note these are the protections here, or because of the association with a person with one or more of these actual or perceived characteristics. Really quick, I want to break this down. The first part, there's an underlying act that is committed because of, in whole or in part. And I think the fact that we distinguish that in California is really important. It could be in whole or in part because of, meaning because of someone's characteristics. That means they chose the person because of that characteristic. You don't have to have sort of demonstrate some kind of animosity in your heart or hatred in that way. You have to show you chose someone because they had that characteristic. I think that's important because we've seen cases in the past where people have said, no, they were dating, so they couldn't have hated them. No, if you chose the person because that characteristic, that constitutes a hate crime. And so again, that's the definition under the California Penal Code. And these slides will be available again for everyone. So there's a lot of legal stuff in here, and you can look at it later, so you have to take it down now, but I want you to know that that's the definition we have under California law. The next slide. I wanted to give other examples because when you hear people talk about hate crimes laws, people might think there's one hate crimes law. What I just gave you was a statute that provides the definition for what a hate crime is under California law. There are generally we think of two different kinds of hate crimes laws. One is a standalone crime. In California, we have that, meaning someone could be charged with an act as a hate crime. And again, it's a standalone crime. Or you see the other two sections are about what we call penalty enhancements. So someone is charged with an underlying crime, their penalty may be enhanced or increased if it can be shown that they were targeted for a hate crime. So I think I'm just putting out that we have both of those kinds. I don't think it necessarily impacts, well, it could impact your work because there are some states, for example, that don't have standalone crimes, and there's an open debate about whether that's important to have in addition to an enhancement. So just wanted to provide those. Next slide, please. I wanted to give one example of a recent California statute on hate crimes that and I'm raising this as well because it highlights, I think, something I mentioned earlier, the power of community advocates in this state. This statute came from people, I think, across the state, including some people in Marin who highlighted an issue that happened in their community. So this just talks about the fact that, existing law in California treated the swastika, the noose, and the desecrated cross, so a burning cross, for example, as symbols of terror, recognizing they could be something that would be used to threaten someone, and therefore, we're covered under hate crimes laws. This made the criminal penalties the same for each symbol. So it simply tried to bring them all into sort of a consistent application, and also that they would be banned when they were used in these areas. They are banned because they are threats, and threats are banned under California law. So that's why I wanted to highlight this, because I know this question comes up. I think the Nazi swastika, the noose, the burning cross, I think everyone on this call recognizes that they are indeed a threat. It is something that we have to sometimes remind people of when we're talking about, when you see these in a community, why they would constitute a hate crime. They are a threat. Next slide, please. And I wanted to give these here again. I can, and I think as a staff member for CRD, I can provide more information about what are the existing statutes that apply here. But something else we have in California is that we, for example, if you look at that last one, 13023, it requires California law enforcement agencies to report on hate crimes to the California Department of Justice. I know there are some, I know one particular commissioner who's been advocating for this to happen at the federal level, but it does not. I wanted you to know this because you will hear many of my former colleagues when I was working at a federal civil rights agency, and also when I was working for the Department of Justice, law enforcement agencies do not have to report to the FBI. their hate crimes data. In California, law enforcement agencies do have to report to the California DOJ. We have that requirement in California. It is not a federal requirement. So often you will hear one of the key priorities for many civil rights groups, and this is open to debate, but one of the priorities for many civil rights groups is let's make reporting mandatory at the federal level. I just wanted to be clear that we have that at the state level right now. Also wanted to, I put post in here, and I did a government no-no, which was I put an acronym without an explanation. The POST is the Police Officer Standards and Training. I put that in there because I think that's a resource you all should know about and something that can have a lot of impact. And I know some of you have worked with POST probably across the country. This is the training agency that can often, like in California, certify law enforcement agencies. So they can have a lot of influence and a lot of power about sort of how law enforcement addresses hate crimes. So I put these two sections in here because POST is already required to develop guidelines and training on addressing hate crimes, and they have to include a model policy. I think that's important, maybe something you want to reference as you're thinking about this work. And it also has a requirement to implement a course for training law enforcement regarding sexual orientation and gender identity. And I think this is important as well, because again, as we're looking at where data is pointing us, we know there's an increase in hate crimes as well, targeting the LGBT community. So I'm going to share those as well. The next slide, please. And this is a part where I'm going to cut myself short because this is what I used to do all the time, but I'm not going to get too into the weeds on this. I just thought it was important to be fully responsive to Commissioner Dansky's question. Federal hate crimes laws, there's a lot of different laws that fall under what a federal hate crime would include. I'm going to spend most of my time, which is going to be very brief, but most of my time on the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. That's the statute most people think of now when they're thinking about hate crimes. But I thought it was important for you to see. And I'm going to go to the next slide. I think but actually, could you go back one? I just want to give a little bit more. On the federally protected activities, this is something that this has been around since 1968. Part of the reason the Shepard-Byrd Act was passed was because it was limited. It didn't cover gender identity or sexual orientation, and it required that someone be engaged in a federally protected activity, meaning it made it very hard to bring these cases. I say that because when a hate crime happens in California, there may be, there's a state response, there could also be a federal response. So I want you to know sort of what the different jurisdictions look like in overlapping jurisdiction. Fair Housing Act, one of the most charged federal hate crimes are under the Fair Housing Act. I don't think people realize that. There are criminal protections for people from hate under the Fair Housing Act. The others are somewhat more self-explanatory. And if I go to the next slide, the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act. Again, this is the first statute that allowed federal criminal prosecution of hate crimes motivated by a victim's actual or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity. This was, again, advocates, I think it took 13 years to get this law passed from when it was first introduced. It makes it a federal crime to willfully cause bodily injury. And I won't go into all the details, but what I will note is that you will not see threat in this definition. So again, in California, a threat is criminalized. Under federal law, a threat is criminalized, but under one of the other statutes. So you don't have to become an expert on all of these different statutes to sort of understand, I think, that there is a deep complexity to how we think about civil rights, to how we think about hate crimes laws. But in California, we have a statute, we have a definition for how we define a crime. And I think that's likely what will be the most useful criminal definition. But just know when you're talking to community members, they're going to know about these statutes. They may have heard something about them. So it'll be important to have that context. Next question, or next slide, please. Okay, so this is the part where we are out of my comfort statute land, and we are now talking about a definition that will work for communities, and I think is working as well across our state and actually across the country. One of the things we learned from advocates, and in particular, I'm going to highlight, for example, Stop AAPI Hate. So Commissioner Che, who works with Stop AAPI Hate, has highlighted is when we talk about who's targeted for hate, including, for example, the recent increase in anti-AAPI acts of hate, what most people are reporting may not rise to the level of a crime, and yet they're still causing extreme harm. So the question is, how do we define incident in a way that we can sort of, as a state agency, respond effectively, respect the experience of people who've been targeted for hate, while also understanding that some things will be a crime and some will not. One of the things I want to point out is you often hear it's a hate crime or it's a hate incident. So if it doesn't rise to the level of a crime, then it's not against the law. That is not how we should be approaching this. There are two kinds of hate incidents. So one kind of hate incident may not be a crime, but it still violates the law. So it could violate civil law. And I'm making this distinction. I know this sounds like I'm getting maybe a little too in the weeds about sort of criminal versus civil, but it matters because people need to, it's important that we respect the fact that there are some acts of hate that don't rise to the level of crime, but they're still civil rights violations. And especially as somebody at the Civil Rights Department, many of those violations are things we may be able to enforce. So I want to highlight that. Two kinds of incidents. One is not a crime, but violates civil law. Two is not a crime, doesn't violate civil law, but still causes a significant amount of harm in the community. And I think one of the things when I have worked with law enforcement in the past and with community groups is it is so important, and I'm hearing more and more law enforcement do this, that we acknowledge that if it's not a crime, or even if it's not a civil violation, it can still cause deep harm in a community. And we need to find ways to meet the needs of people who are targeted in that way, out of respect for the fact that the harm is real, and that, sorry, it's a little loud in the background here, that we have an obligation to respond to that harm. School is out early, I apologize. So I think, that's how I would look at hate incident. And I will say, because we're in California, I've been working with our partners at LA County to really try and promote us having a common definition of hate incident across the state and really across the country. So again, you got a hate crime, it is a crime. A hate incident maybe violates civil law, doesn't violate the law, but still causes harm. So that's how I would define those, and I'm happy to discuss that further. And again, some of this is out of respect for the experience of communities that have found if it's not a crime, they're not getting any kind of support. Next slide, please. One example of what California has that's, I think, a really powerful tool is the Ralph Civil Rights Act. And it is also a tool that has not been utilized.
Deputy Director Monroe,
yeah.
Commissioner Filer has a question.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, back to what you were saying, were you going to give us an example of something that's criminal, civil, and then one that is something that is neither, but still is creating trauma to an individual? Because that's
sure. I can do, yeah, and I can do it really, I mean, like right now I could just give you a really quick example, and then I'm happy to also during the question and answer period give more too. But so
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
No, not at all. This is perfect. A hate crime. I mentioned someone burns a cross in someone's yard, intending to send a threat to them. Somebody commits an underlying act, criminal act. So someone assaults someone, and it is motivated because they are of their protected category. So that's a crime, and I think that part we're pretty clear on. Two kinds of hate incidents: a hate incident that violates civil rights law. So you could have, one of the things I will point out here, the Ralph Civil Rights Act covers more categories than the crime than the criminal act does. So if someone's targeted for discrimination or for an act of hate on the basis of these categories, then they may be eligible for civil remedies. So if they're genetic information, medical condition, those are things that may fall under other existing protected categories, but could be covered. Another would be, and this is something that I think is important for us as a commission, for you as a commission, and for us as a department to think about. When people experience discrimination, it may be experienced as hate. It may be experienced as and active employment discrimination, it's really hard for people to distinguish those two. So what I would say is, if somebody at work is being treated differently, they may be experiencing that as an act of hate. And if they are being treated differently in violation of our employment civil rights laws, that's a hate incident that's also a violation of civil rights law, civil rights law. Another example, we in schools, we may see students who maybe are targeted for discrimination if they are in cases where the school is not responding effectively or protecting their rights as they have to under both state and federal law, that could be experienced as an act of hate by that person, also a violation of civil rights law, of civil rights law. So those are a couple of examples, and definitely can give more. The last category is generally when you hear people talk about First Amendment protected speech. So perhaps someone is saying something, it's not a threat, but it is incredibly insulting, and that hate speech in that context, not a crime, likely, not a violation of a civil rights law, still causes significant harm. People can, if they put signs up, for example, on their own private property, but others can see it, not a crime, unless it's threatening people, likely not a civil violation, but still causes significant harm. So usually when I talk to people about this third category, it's often protected First Amendment protected speech, but not always. There are other forms. So it's essentially something, it could also just be another form of discrimination that doesn't rise to the level of a civil violation either.
So does that go even on my house? If I choose to paint a swastika, that is not considered a...
Well, I think I would have to say, I'm smiling and looking at Commissioner Sinar, who's the law professor in the group, who could probably jump in and help me with this. But I think the challenge is actually swastikas under that other law I was referring to, there's something inherently threatening about a Nazi swastika.
Okay.
And so I think that's a little bit different.
The swastika, the noose, and the
burning cross, but there's also, I could, I'm a lawyer, so I love to say it depends, and it does depend. And so I would ask, I would have all the specific facts around that, but that's why those are, those represent inherent threats. I will,
okay. Even if it's on your own private property, that could be, okay. That really good to know.
I think that's, and again, it depends. So Commissioner Levin, did you have?
Yeah, first of all, Becky, thank you again. Everyone from DC sends their heartfelt gratitude and regards. I have to say that. One case folks might want to look at is Virginia versus White, where it put an intent requirement on the use of a burning cross. It didn't just say, well, a burning cross in and of itself is a threat, but how it's done. So that's why Director Monroe, I could see in her face going, uh-oh, this is going to become a law review class. But one other just quick thing that I wanted to throw out there. When we had this consortium of folks that wanted this commission passed, and God bless them for helping all of us get to where we're at. There was a case in the 60s where, when talking about civil rights laws, it said the sweep shall be broad, and that's what we really told the legislature. And in the language, I just want to be careful here. Of AB 1126, it not only did specifically say hate crimes will take the definition that we have here in the state, but we also wanted the commission's jurisdiction to be expansive. So, for instance, while homeless aren't protected, they may be down the road. So there was also language that said hate related, and there was also language that talked about protection of civil liberties and civil rights. So what I didn't want people to think is that, and perhaps I should defer to my dear friend and deputy director on this. But that's really one part, and I wouldn't want commissioners to think, if there's something that they're not sure, something about intersectionality or even immigration status, which might be in one piece of legislation but not in another. I wanted to make sure that, at least from the heart, the folks who on the outside of the legislature and the ones in the legislature really looked not to tie our hands. They didn't want us to go into every area, but we talked about things like targeted violence. So for instance, this could cover, if we look at AB 1126, I think everything from people who would try to stop people from speaking at campuses to those who would try to violently interfere with people's right to medical access. And what we're seeing across the country is different types of targeted violence is not only associational, in other words, allies of various groups, but also people who are doing things, whether they're elected officials or medical professionals or school folks. So what I would hope, and I'm going to defer to my dear friends and colleagues at the Civil Rights Department, which for decades have been unsung heroes in this state. So I'm so glad that they're making these presentations today. But we really wanted to have some flexibility, because if there was a problem, for instance, with doctors who assist transgender people making transitions, that they're being harassed, that we not have our hands tied.
I think that's right, and I appreciate that clarification, because I think I love when there's a reference to a specific statute, which of course there was to the hate crime definition, but there is also in this commission's mandate a lot of information about prevention, about understanding how communities work together, and all of that falls under a hate incident. That's why I spent the time sort of talking about a hate incident. So I think Commissioner Levins is absolutely right. You all have a wide mandate, and it includes both addressing the crime and the incident piece. And again, that's reflective also of what we've been hearing from Californians, that they are demanding that we do, that we not only limit ourselves to that definition. So I think that's absolutely right. And that we not only look at crimes and look at carceral solutions, but one of the things, if you look at the wonderful research that came out of Stop AAPI Hate and how lucky we are to have a commissioner who is integral to its formation, so many of these acts of aggression were technically not crimes. But gosh, I really hope that we don't limit ourselves to criminal responses and criminal incidents only. And that's why, thank you so much, Director Monroe, for your clarifications. No, I think that's right. I would also just point out, part of the reason this was housed, that we were so fortunate in the Civil Rights Department to house this, is because we are not connected to the criminal legal system. And I think there was a real recognition that criminal legal responses are not the only response. And I also just, Commissioner Sinar has done a lot of research around sort of looking at alternatives to penalty enhancements and that kind of work too. So I think
we have about 15 more minutes before Commissioner Damsky has to leave us. So
thank you. I will move quickly. I just wanted you all to know, here's the Ralph Civil Rights Act. And I think, I do think it's important to note when because we're talking a lot about sort of different civil rights statutes and how they came about. This is from 1976, and I just want to say that it was Leon Ralph, who's an African-American lawmaker from Watts, who wrote a California state law that was aimed at protecting people from violence based on protected classes. So this was in 1976. This is well before most states or most people were thinking about these issues. And I think that we should be giving credit and respect for where this law comes from. But again, you have the right to be free from violence based on these protected categories. And this is giving you ability to get civil penalties. So if we go to the next slide. These are some bias-related acts that are forbidden under the Ralph Act. So again, these include crimes. And again, the distinction here is not whether or not what's covered here is a crime, but whether or not you can get civil penalties. And so I want to go to the next slide, which will provide the kinds of remedies you can get. One is a restraining order. So I think many people have heard this more colloquially, but essentially you can protect someone from being physically abused or threatened, stalked or harassed. And once you have an order from a court, violators of that order can be fined or jailed. I think many of us who have worked in this space know that restraining orders are on pieces of paper, and so sometimes they're only as effective as the enforcement, but it's important that we know that that is available for people. Actual damages, so that could include cost of medical treatment, lost wages, property repair, payment for emotional suffering. So those are the kinds of civil damages you can collect. The next slide, please. Punitive damages, so this is where a court can order additional damages to punish the violators. civil penalties, so additional funds that could be awarded, and attorney's fees. So I just wanted to give a sense, because we keep talking about civil and criminal. At the end of the day, someone can bring this. They can also do it through the Civil Rights Department. So to be clear, you could come to us and we can help bring these claims in order to collect damages. Next. Additional information, I just wanted to give a complete list of the protected categories under California civil rights law, which would include, sorry, sure. And also additional information about criminal civil rights laws that are available on our colleagues at the Office of the Attorney General for the state of California's website. Yes, my 7 and 10-year-old know a lot more about hate crimes than most kids. So there you go. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this is getting a little bit outside of the bounds of sort of defining what the laws are, but you all have access to this. We just want to be clear that we know when someone's targeted for hate, that people are going to respond in different ways. The first thing we want to remind people is you got to feel safe. We you know, oh, please, Commissioner Dansky, and let people know about their options. And so whether you feel comfortable going to law enforcement or not, please.
Thank you, Director Monroe. So one of the questions that I was holding was where in this whole body of law and options do we I mean, I saw that we talked about sex-based crimes, but what I was thinking about specifically was what we call domestic violence, quote unquote.
Yes.
And does that also fall under any hate crime jurisdiction or hate incident? And then what about when we talk about violence against children? And is there anything that's specific about age-targeted hate? So I was really thinking about all the different ways that I see this show up and wondering how large our purview is here.
So I'm going to respond to the first question around sort of domestic violence. I mean, one of the things that is covered is gender-based violence, right? And I know that is not always the equivalent to domestic violence, but I do want to note that that is, if someone is targeted because of their gender, that would constitute a hate crime. What I will tell you, and so one is I could do more research and get back to you about sort of how this has been treated generally under California law. Under federal law, when the Shepard Byrd Act was passed, if you look at the legislative history, there's a lot of back and forth about people being concerned that if we expanded it to gender, that that all acts of domestic violence would be covered. And I think that's interesting that was a concern. I think I wouldn't have shared, you know, I think that's something that I just want to point out that, so there are different opinions about whether domestic violence would be covered as an act of hate. I think that the underlying issue will always come down to, was the person targeted because of a protected category? And if it's gender, it could be. So I don't have a clear answer for you other than to say, I know at the federal level, there was a lot of back and forth. There was, I mean, again, this is at the federal level, not at the state, but there was concern that all rapes would be considered hate crimes. And I'm not sure, you know, we can query why that would be a concern, but that was something that was raised. So I don't have a clear answer for you on that. With respect to age, it is not currently under criminal law, but I think if you look at, you know, other civil rights protections, there may be a place to sort of think about that. I don't have a clear answer for you on children. I confess I haven't thought about that, but I think I understand the question. What I would say is that often when there's a category that's not specifically protected, they may be protected by another category. So for example, right now, people who are unhoused are not covered under California law. There's often an intersection with other categories that are protected. And I think Commissioner Levin just put in the chat a little bit more about recognizing gender-based hate crimes. There are some higher profile examples that I can provide you. We used to use as the example when we would do these trainings. But I think it's an important question. And I think part of what that link that you're seeing is trying to help people recognize is that it's not something that people are often, you don't see a lot of gender-based hate crimes cases being brought. And so it may be a question of not recognizing them. So it's an important question.
Thank you.
And then I think I'll just go through these next few slides. We don't need to, these are just sort of more practical things for if someone is targeted for hate. So we can go to the next slide, giving people information about practical things you can do if you're targeted. How do you, if you can capture information that you have, what does evidence look like? All of those kinds of things, which I think may be useful to people. And again, these slides will be available for people to take a look at. You can also access this information on our website. Go to the next slide, please. And I think I'm going to leave it there. I would just say here, you know, I've given you some definitions. This is sort of the beginning and not the end. So I think to part of what Commissioner Levin was saying, yes, there's a definition of a hate crime. Yes, your mandate encompasses more, because anytime you're thinking about preventing hate crimes, you have to be thinking about hate incidents. You have to be thinking about acts of discrimination. We always talk about the fact an act of hate does not happen in a vacuum. It doesn't come out of nowhere. So if you're talking about prevention, you have to think about how we enforce all of the civil rights that we have here in the state. For full disclosure, part of this is from some of Commissioner Sonar's work, also about really thinking, when we're thinking about opportunities to enhance the response to hate, what should we, you know, one thing we know, whether it's a hate incident or a hate crime, acts of hate can cause devastating consequences, not just for individuals, but for communities. So one of the things we can do is, how do we understand and address the needs of people who are targeted for hate? You have this amazing opportunity through because of who you are and because of the work you all have done in the community to inform that through the intake sessions that you'll be doing, to really hear what is it that you need, not what is it that we think you need, because we've been doing this for a long time and we know what is it that you need. Are victim compensation funds accessible to people who are targeted for hate? Are other resources accessible? If not, why? Is it because people are scared to come to government? Is it because of you know, other restrictions that maybe aren't necessary? Maybe you can look at how do people access resources and support, and what are the barriers? And really thinking about expanding culturally competent resources and support. I've been highlighting the critical ways in which community-based organizations in our state, the role they play. And again, I think because I see Commissioner Chan thinking about Stop AAPI Hate, it is amazing what they have done. We also have an obligation as a state to provide those services. We cannot always look to others to do that. Part of what we have to recognize is, if people are going to feel safe accessing support, it must be culturally competent, meaning not just in language, but often with people who have a shared experience of that kind of discrimination or hate, so that we can make sure that we're actually meeting people where they are. So I'm just thrilled because you have so many opportunities to do something with this commission, both because of the rich backgrounds you all bring to this, but also because of your mandate, which is to really help to think about not only hate crimes, but how do we prevent, which requires thinking about incidents as well. So I think that's it. I think I got Commissioner Damsky out in time. Good. but please ask questions if there are.
Thank you so much. That was really very helpful. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Deputy Director Monroe. The slide that you put around the definition of a hate incident, can we go back to that slide? Are you?
Absolutely, I think, yeah.
This is language that is like working language for you, not necessarily.
That's right.
It's not official, right? It's
not official. This is working, and it's working. Just, I will say, I'm trying to work with groups like at the national level, as well as at the state level and the local level, so we can all come to one definition.
So to get to what Commissioner Damsky, your question, the subcommittee with Commissioner Suthers is, my question to you, Commissioner Damsky, is, using this, would this be a good starting point for you to have a discussion in your subcommittee? We'll have a discussion here shortly, but to have to have a conversation around and work with Deputy Director Monroe or other staff on coming up with a recommendation for the commission.
I think so. I think it might be helpful if it was perhaps organized in a chart form rather than all this narrative. So it might be easier to see, compare and contrast what's federal, what's state, what's a hate crime, what's a hate incident. So, you know, like in some kind of a graphic where it was really like a reference sheet, for example. I think that would be really useful.
Great. So what I would like to do now then is for us to roll into a conversation. I know you have to depart, Commissioner Damsky, but we'll keep you updated on what happens is for us then to roll into discussion, questions, et cetera, and then we'll take public comment on this, and then we'll come back to either referring this to the subcommittee on law enforcement recommendations or to come back and work with staff and for us to officially adopt a position. So with that, let's roll into discussion, and then we'll have some public comment, come back to the discussion, and then when we're done with this piece, we'll take a break before moving on to the next agenda item. Commissioner Salcedo.
Oh, Chair, before I'm
Oh.
sorry, and I don't mean to interrupt Commissioner
Go ahead.
Salcedo before Commissioner Damsky leaves. Sorry, I just wanted to sort of put out there to your question specifically, Chair, whether this answers the questions. The other thing I wanted to point out, and I know Commissioner Southers has worked with IACP for a long time. Just to be clear, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which is the sort of largest organization of police agencies in the country, and I think maybe in the world, but anyway, they have a model policy that specifically calls for collecting hate incident and hate crime data. So I just want to put that out there because you're working with law enforcement, Commissioner Damsky, it is something that law enforcement is much more aware of than you might expect. So and that's all. I just wanted to leave you with that. So sorry about that, Commissioner Salcedo.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Salcedo.
Thank you. Can we go to the very first slide to where the hate crime definition? I think it was one of the, yes. So this is right, like what we have in our state, right? I know that, like, as you went through the slides, there were a couple of places to where it actually mentioned gender identity, right? And so in this particular definition, right, because it's sort of like the starting point to all of the sub. I'm wondering what can we do to make sure that gender identity is also included? Because I mean, obviously, gender speaks to just either, masculine or feminine. But for individuals such as myself who are visibly trans, right, and we are actually attacked because we are trans, right? Yeah, so I'm not sure if there's an amendment that could, or what would be the process for that?
Thank you for the question. And under the definition of gender in California, it has been clear through California law, gender includes gender identity in California. So, and it includes actually under some federal law as well. So I hear what, from a technical perspective, I understand what you're saying in terms of sort of people reading it and not seeing it, but it is absolutely included under gender. And I think, so I just wanted to make that clear that this is the text of the statute, but if you look at any kind of interpretation of it, and I'm actually if you look at, and I hate to do this to you, but I will, 422.56 actually includes it in the definition. So it's included currently under statute. It's just, you have to go to the next section to see how gender is defined.
Is that on your slide?
No, it's the next section, sorry, the next section of the statute.
Okay.
Yeah, so I did see it a couple of instances in some of the slides, but if this is the the starting point of a definition, right? Like I get it that it's included, but when I look at this, and I'm sure other members of the public, right? I don't know. I just want to, I guess, learn and understand what is the process to perhaps submit a recommendation to include it in this particular section and not as it is right now.
And I don't know the answer to that question in terms of process wise. I can tell you it could certainly be a recommendation of the commission to the legislature, I think, to sort of expressly include it here. I would just point out that under, and I think, so for example, if we talk to them and they say, oh, look, it's covered under 4022.56, it tells you, because the way that the statutes work often is you've got the main statute, and then they'll say, this is how each term is defined. currently it is defined to include gender identity. But I think to your point, Commissioner, if this is the starting point, this is what people are seeing, I think we need to make it clear. The other thing that I think we should do is, I confess, because there is such a disproportionate amount of hate targeted towards transgender people, in particular transgender women of color. I think I operate understanding that this gender includes gender identity, because sadly that is where it is needed to be used the most. But one of the things we can do in the interim is certainly every time we put it, we could even put 422.56 underneath it that says gender includes gender identity, just to be clear about that. But you are absolutely right to highlight it. And I will just say the, if we're talking about data and who is targeted, living at the intersection of gender identity, race, is a particularly important thing for us to note, because of the disproportionate number of hate crimes targeting people on the basis of gender identity and race.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Salcedo. Commissioner Sanar.
So thank you, first of all, to Becky for that really fantastic presentation. Also, Commissioner Salcedo, for the point you just made. I think it's important, and I do hope that it's something that maybe our Policy Recommendations Committee or someone else can take up. I wanted to say just kind of 3 quick things regarding how we are going to define the scope of our work. And the first starts with our mandate. And so I actually just reread the legislative mandate this morning because I wanted to be clear about it. And there's actually just one subsection of that entire statute that refers to this definition of a hate crime. And it's actually within the section that talks about our policy report. So our policy report that's due in July and then thereafter uses this definition for hate crimes. But if you look at actually our statute as a whole, much more often it refers to acts of hate or the state of hate as a very explicit part of our mandate. And that's not defined anywhere, but I think it's like absolutely clear from the face of our statute that we are not limited to this definition. So that's just sort of like, we don't need to feel any reservation about broadening our focus, because that's exactly what the legislature did already. The second point is that nonetheless, while we are not bound by this definition, I also feel that we should not be too eager to consider everything a crime. And there are reasons for not, when we think about hate activity, to not want to make everything a crime. And that sometimes when we start renaming things, so when we think, say, of bullying in schools as a form of hate crime as opposed to bullying, then that sort of framing leads us to think about the law enforcement route in terms of solutions. Because if something is a crime, typically we then think about going to the police, at least traditionally that is how it has been for segments of communities, not everybody, of course, but the involvement of law enforcement. And so it's not always useful to put everything into the hate crime box. It can actually be problematic in terms of, making it seem like exclusively or predominantly a law enforcement issue. So I think it's just important for us to keep that in mind, that, our goal should not be to sort of, make every form of activity that is ill-intentioned or even motivated on the basis of any of these characteristics necessarily to want to consider that a crime. And third and final point is that, so I think absolutely when we define the scope of our work in our report and elsewhere, we should include hate incidents, absolutely. And I think the definition that Becky put up is a good starting point. We can finesse that if we want to, but that should definitely be in there. At the same time, I think defining the scope of our work broadly is good, but that doesn't mean that our focus should necessarily go to everything that could conceivably fall within that very broad definition. And I say that just because, thinking about who we are as a commission, we are not necessarily, like, you could consider everything at some level to be a form of hate or, hate-related activity. But I don't know that we are the commission to work on child abuse or even domestic violence or all kinds of employment discrimination or so many other issues. And so that's not to say that we should define it out of our scope. I don't think we should do that. I think a broad definition of our potential work is a good one, but that's different from saying, what do we think think we are best positioned as an institution, as an agency, to work on. And I don't think we need to decide all of that right now, but I just want to keep those two questions a little bit separate.
Thank you, Commissioner Snar. Commissioner Levin.
Yes, just real briefly. Last decade, middle last decade, transgender and other related type of characteristics were added to what the FBI counts. So that's one thing with regard to the hate crime. And again, if I could just reiterate what Commissioner Snar said, there are types of aggression that don't come up to hate crime, but still should be something that we look at. Study just out of Princeton showing that transphobic protests have skyrocketed. So there are a variety of data sets that affect social cohesion that don't always revolve around criminality. We saw an unfortunate rise during the time when I've been monitoring protests of, for instance, anti-immigrant, xenophobic, anti-Muslim, anti-gay, and now anti-transphobic. One other quick thing, just with respect to gender. A large part of what we're seeing in the extremist world are these incels and the manosphere, which is something that is unfortunately pervasive in our society. So one of the things, for instance, that the Proud Boys revolved around was not only this Euro chauvinism and this Western chauvinism, but also views with respect to misogyny that came out at various times. So again, what the legislators and certainly the coalition of folks that wanted this passed did want to see something expansive, so that, for instance, a group that's not covered explicitly, for instance, undocumented people, which I asked the legislature to cover back in 1993 and never did. Now folks are saying, well, it comes under national origin. Anytime that we can specifically identify and also recognize the harms that are going to particular groups, I totally agree with my co-commissioners. But what I just wanted to again reiterate is that even if technically there is an entity that is targeted for violence, whether it's homeless people, undocumented people, or the elderly, for instance, that can come within what both the coalition that got this legislation through and the legislators wanted us to do. So I want to thank my co-commissioners and the California Civil Rights Department for making that clear. I don't want folks to think that they have their hands tied, and we have to make sure that we say that we stand firm with these communities, the transgender community or undocumented folks, whether or not they're technically covered by the law or not. And thank you for that opportunity to point that out. But transgender has been covered with respect to national definitions for some time now. And indeed, we saw an over 50% increase in anti-transgender hate crimes in 2022 in Los Angeles, along with nationally an increase in these horrible, vile, bigoted, transphobic protests, often by people who are looking to harm folks.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Salcedo, before we get to you, I just want to give the commissioners who've not had an opportunity to speak on this topic, Commissioner Filer, Commissioner Suthers, Commissioner Che, Commissioner Cuellar, to see if you had any comments before. All right. Thank you, Commissioner Salcedo. You're on mute, Commissioner Salcedo.
My bad. Thank you. Just a quick request, Commissioner Levin, if you would be kind to share the study that you referenced for us to look at, would be great for this body to look at.
Salcedo, Director Kish, did you have a comment?
I am going to hold.
Okay. Thank you. Before we, I just want to see if there's any other comments before we take some public comment, and then after the public comment, we'll have a conversation around if we want to refer this back to the subcommittee to then come back to our next commission meeting with a proposal or a recommendation. So, Mariel, is there a public comment?
Yes, we have a public comment from Greg Deger.
Welcome, Greg. Do you have a comment?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, you have 3 minutes, please.
Good. My name is Greg Deger. I'm the civil rights advocate at the ARC of California, which is the state's largest intellectual and developmental disability organization. I'll introduce myself more under public comments later, but there were 3 points that I wanted to make that I think will be useful to the commission under this item. And they all three, I should say, concern the criminal law, not the civil law that Ms. Monroe was talking about. The first is that the legal term hate crime is a legal misnomer. If you or I or anybody heard that term and we never heard it before, we would think it would means crime that's committed because of hate. That's not what it means. It means a crime that's committed because of bias against any one of many against any of the protected categories under the hate crimes law. It need not be hate at all. Someone could claim, "Oh, I love people with disabilities. I just target them because I want to rob them," or something like that. So it's the term hate crime is a legal misnomer. We should remember that. Second is that there are no protected groups or categories or classes under the hate crimes law, and you hear that often. In fact, I think I saw it on one of your slides. There are protected characteristics, and that's important for 2 reasons that we use that term. One is simple accuracy. That's what the law says. But the other is the reason the law says that. When we wrote that in 2004, we wanted to make it clear that hate crimes laws protect everyone. They do not create, as has been charged, and a lot of people still think, special rights for some people. So they're protected characteristics, not protected groups, not protected classes. And the third concerns, in particular, anti-disability hate crimes, which are like many other terms are defined in the 0.56 section, which was not in your slides. And it's parallel in some ways to the definition of gender that you were discussing. That in the case of anti-disability hate crimes, is a very inclusive list of what disability means, and it can include inherent disabilities, birth defects, mental illness, injuries, illnesses, temporary and permanent disabilities. And this is not widely recognized, and it's one of the reasons why we call anti-disability hate crimes the invisible hate crimes that are almost never recognized by law enforcement or even by the victims in many cases. So those are the 3 points I just hope the commission can keep in mind.
Thank you so much for your comment, Greg.
We have a second comment from Dylan via email from Dylan Hosier. Dylan, would you like to say your comment, or would you like me to read it?
Oh, you can just read it. That's fine.
Okay. This is from Dylan Hosier from ICANN, the Israeli American Civic Action Network. Comment on definition. Agree with Commissioners Sinar and Levin's comments regarding the definition of hate. It was the legislative intent for the Commission to examine and address broader issues, including acts of hate and/or the state of hate, not just hate crimes as defined by law. Often incidents or acts of hate precede hate crimes, especially violent hate crimes. Also agree with Commissioner Sinar's comments that we need to be careful not to define everything as hate.
Thank you for reading the comment, Mariel, and thank you for the comment, Dylan. Now let's, are there any other comments or questions?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So, comment, can Becky Monroe's slides be made available to public attendees?
Yes, we can put those on the commission website, Director Monroe. Yes, we'll make them available on the commission
Yes.
website. Thank you. Anything else, Mariel?
No, that's all.
Great, thank you. Is there any other discussion, questions from the commissioners? Does someone want to make a motion to have the subcommittee take this up and work with staff to come back with a recommendation to the commission at our next meeting?
I'll
Or
move
propose
to,
something else. Go ahead,
I'll
Commissioner
move-
Claire.
I'll move to have the policy subcommittee come back for a recommendation from the board.
Are you saying, Commissioner Claire, the policy subcommittee, or so this originally came from the subcommittee on recommendations for law enforcement? Are you saying refer it to the policy subcommittee?
I would refer it to whoever would be taking that on. So if it would be law enforcement, then I would recommend it go back to them.
So your motion is to refer this back to the subcommittee on law enforcement recommendations to work with staff to come back with a recommendation for the committee to discuss and approve.
That is correct.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Filer. Discussion on this motion. Commissioner Suthers, did you, since this is your subcommittee or that you chair, do you have any comments about it?
No, this whole debate was very useful. I do think that despite our best efforts as a subcommittee of two, that it's going to be very important that we have the entire commission understand and agree on how we're going to move forward. I won't say we're concerned, but I think this is very important that we come to a consensus on what it is we are using as our scope. And particularly as it relates to our subcommittee, what it is we're communicating to law enforcement that they should also be using as their scope.
Thank you, Commissioner Suthers. And we'll make sure that Deputy Director Watts, can we make sure that the committee has all of the subcommittee has all of the suggestions from today, including the public comment?
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other discussion on this motion? And is there any public comment?
No public comment.
Thank you. So the motion is to refer this back to the subcommittee on law enforcement recommendations to work with staff to come back with a recommendation for the commission to discuss and approve. All those in favor, or actually we'll have call the roll for the vote.
Chair Roybal.
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Shea,
Yes.
Commissioner Cuellar,
Yes.
Commissioner Dembski. Oh, not here. Commissioner Filer,
Yes.
Commissioner Levin,
Yes.
Commissioner Salcedo, Commissioner Salcedo, I think you're on mute.
Apologize. Aye.
Commissioner Snar,
Yes.
Commissioner Suthers.
Yes.
Okay, so we have 8 ayes.
Great, the motion carries. Thank you so much. And thank you for that very rich discussion, in particular to the staff for preparing that material. I can't wait to have the conversation at the next commission meeting. I feel like it was very enlightening. So thank you to the commissioners and to the staff and to the public for all of those comments. It is right now 2:20. Let us take a 5-minute break and be back at 2:25 to continue our meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Great.
Welcome back, everyone.
Commissioner Roybal, you're doing an amazing job in keeping us moving along. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. I appreciate that. So welcome back. Let's see. I think we have 1, 2, 5, 6, 7. I think we're all back. Welcome back, everyone. Let's pick up where we left off, and what we want to do is to come back to the Community Conflict Resolution Unit, because we did not get to ask questions of the team or engage in any discussion around that. So if that team is back, Gregory, Christina, and Marquez, thank you for allowing us to move the agenda around a little bit so that we could accommodate Commissioner Damsky's unfortunate early departure. So let's go back to the Community Conflict Resolution Unit conversation. And I just want to open it up for discussion, questions, etc. From the commissioners. Go ahead, Commissioner Sonar.
Well, I will defer actually to others. I do have a question, but I know I've spoken already. So come back if they're time permitting. I will have a question afterwards.
Please go ahead, Commissioner Sonar, and then we'll go to Commissioner Che.
Okay, thank you. So I would love for the staff to maybe just say a little bit about their thoughts on cultivating conflict resolution skills of community leaders who may already be on the ground, given that the team itself will be limited in serving an entire state. How do you develop the expertise? What are your initial thoughts in developing the expertise of people in the communities?
That is a great question. Early on, when we started, we went through a series of exercises where we try to identify our priorities. And we certainly understood that being so small, we had to prioritize. We certainly know that with small unit, we have to think smart. And one of those areas of service is training. Training has been definitely on our radar, and one of the concepts that we've been discussing is developing training material precisely for that, to enhance conflict resolution skills of others, be it human relation commissions, as well as leaders of community-based organizations or advocacy leaders, anybody out there who wants to be a conflict resolver, somebody who wants to play a role in community conflict resolution. So there are different ways we've kind of discussed it and thought about it in developing training in different phases. And of course, since we just started in October and we've had such an emphasis on developing the infrastructure, it is a slow process, but there have been, as examples, 2 products, well, actually more than just 2, but we certainly have begun drafting, and there's a draft in review of a Conflict Resolution 101. And then one of our other projects right now, or you may have heard of the Los Angeles Metro collaboration, which is a very huge collaboration. I've never seen anything like it, where the LA Metro system is collaborating with city, county, state and now the federal government on an anti-hate campaign. And one of the ways that we're contributing is to help develop a de-escalation guide, a verbal de-escalation guide for some of Metro's employees to assist them in working and engaging members of the community and people who are utilizing the Metro system. So we are working in other areas as well in developing drafts on it insofar as like compliance. And maybe Christina, can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So something else that we're working on in terms of training is related to government compliance, right? So making sure that government processes, stakeholder processes are as inclusive as possible. That means everything from putting pronouns in signature blocks to ensuring that meeting spaces are appropriate for persons with disabilities, depending on the type of community. For example, agricultural community, the type of day that things are, when meetings are held, childcare, right, things of that nature. So really trying to think about compliance, but also good practices for inclusion. Certainly there's a lot of compliance issues around language services, around reasonable accommodations. And so we want to make sure that government is meeting its obligation minimally, right? And to add something on to what Marquez was mentioning, and to speak to the question of, a small team and wanting to maximize impact, we're also certainly thinking about train the trainer models, right? There's a lot of power and empowerment in that community to community member connection. And we do know that in particular communities, immigrant communities, right, there may be a fear of things like public charge. And so they may not be willing to come to, a training put on by a government agency, but they may be willing to reach out to their trusted community members and community leaders to help them build those peacemaking and bridge building skills that are part of conflict resolution.
And Greg wants to add a little something too.
I'll just briefly add, separate from us being small, we firmly believe that a lot of these efforts should be led by locals and community groups. So it's very much part of our mission is to capacity build for others and to support them. So while we may provide technical consultations and help with designing processes, that can be completely led by local stakeholders. And that's very important to us. So not just because we're small, but because we also firmly believe in it.
I can also add that one of the additional ways we've also looked at it is to create sort of different types of modules, introductory skills modules. Another one will be how to respond to certain types of situations modules. And also, since we know that there's a lot of organizations out there that have various different types of trainings, we want to have ours be short. We understand that people are busy and that sometimes you have to develop training modules in chunks that are digestible and easy to consume. So that's also part of our thinking.
Thank you, Commissioner Snar. Commissioner Che.
Lower my hand. Thank you so much to the small but mighty Community Conflict Resolution Unit. Very impressive presentation. And my question is, and perhaps an insight that I did want to share because of Stop API Hate's effort to understand the nature of hate that our communities are experiencing, and very much agree that we should be tracking and responding to incidents because they become the precursor of something much larger and potentially more violent. And that is one of the things that we are noting is there's a lot of conflict in our communities and across our communities due to perceptions, due to real or perceived scarcity of resources. And one of the things that I thought as a recommendation is that to really look at the data in terms of where we are seeing patterns. For example, we had noted that there were a number of incidents between tenants in public housing units. And so one of the things that we were hoping to think through is what are ways that we can work on a more massive scale with public housing departments, because they have a desire to address tenant conflicts, but they don't have capacity or the skills. And so that would be a recommendation. We also saw other things like concert venues where these concert companies really don't have protocols for when there's conflict. And so oftentimes what you're seeing is conflicts that become racialized or based on someone's identity. And so I think that working with understanding where it's happening and working with those entities where they have the inreach and again, the desire to really deal with conflict that's happening. So as an example, we noted in our data that public transit is a place where we have many community members, women of color, trans, people who identify as trans, who talked about or described harassment and what are efforts that our public transit agencies can be more proactive in addressing, this type of harassment and in some cases hate. Thank you.
Points well taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Filer.
Just to jump on what we're, and support what we're saying, I think that if we look at incidents and we can jump in on an earlier, I'm going to call it prevention. It's truly not pure prevention because something is happening and break the cycle before it becomes major criminal acts. We will really have done something, because once it reaches a level of criminal act, we have a much bigger challenge in front of us. So I really value this discussion a lot.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. I have a question for the unit, which is, you are small and mighty, but do you feel like you will be deluged with requests and that will hinder your capacity?
That would be a great problem to have at this point, I think. I'm being a little flip, but not really, because we know that there is a tremendous need. We know there's a tremendous need out there, and this is the first time that anything of this nature has been in existence in California. Certainly Marquez can speak to his experience at the federal level, but we know there's a tremendous amount of need. And we do have, we've thought about prioritization of the types of requests, and certainly there are instances where our presence may not be helpful, right? That there may be already a resource-rich area, right? Or folks who are being responsive, who are trusted within the community. But I think we would welcome those requests for services at this time. We're still very new, but we have a lot of experience between the three of us, and I think we're all very passionate about this and all want to do what we can to serve the community as best as we can.
Great. And are you already connected with Commissioners Filer and Cuellar, who are on the subcommittee for the community forums? Great.
We are.
Awesome.
Working together. Yeah.
Director Kish.
Thank you. I just wanted to add something to what was just said, which is that in the community conflict resolution unit, as with so many of the other divisions and units of our department, our goal is to bolster, increase, and support rather than supplant. So we know, for example, that the Federal Community Relations Service, which Marquez used to work for, is active in California and around the country, and that they too have resource limitations that prevent them from taking action in every scenario where they are called upon. And so having a good relationship with them is a way for us to go into places where we collectively perceive a need and we can divide, right? We can say California's team will go here in a place where the federal team cannot, and vice versa. The other thing that I wanted to add is the importance of the team's affirmative work to identify scenarios, events, geographic areas where we might not actually be getting requests, but where the services can be needed. And this ties into our affirmative approach to civil rights work and civil rights enforcement generally, which is we do want and need to be responsive to the calls of communities around the state, but we also know that sometimes where help is most needed is where we are least likely to see a request. And so our focus is also on affirmatively identifying places where we can intervene to make good change. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Salcedo.
Thank you again so much. And to the team and everything everything that has been done. I wanted to take a moment to really recognize the amazing work that has been happening, but also I want to express personally how I can, in different ways, see the light at the end of the tunnel, right? I know that there's, I've seen so many horrible incidents, not just in my community, but the different communities that I am also a part of. And, I can honestly see that there is going to be change, and that our collective work is gonna impact our communities in a better way. And so I just want to appreciate that and the work that everybody is doing. And also, just remind us, right, that that we need to look at whatever resources we need to do this work, right? And really understand what is the root cause of things, right? And really support support people for us to have a better future and a better world. So I just want to appreciate everyone who, all my fellow commissioners and, the team at the Civil Rights Department for giving me, and I'm sure to many other people, the light. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Salcedo. Marquez.
Yeah, and want to remind everyone that a lot of the work in this field happens through the outreach and the relationships we develop over time. Because once we build trust, people will share our information and say, call these folks. They can help you. So please share our information, and we're happy to do outreach with various groups that you work with to, again, share what we can do for them, how we can be helpful, so that if there is a need, we can certainly, discuss how we can best be of use in whatever situation people may be facing. Because we all know that the different community infrastructures to respond to conflict is different across the state. LA, for example, is very rich. And I think it's a perfect example with the LA Metro Anti-Hate Project. There's a ton of organizations on that project, whereas in other parts of the state, if there's a hate crime, there's not that many resources. So please share our information, and we're happy to chat with them to share more information about our unit. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to the entire Community Conflict Resolution Unit. Thanks for joining us today and taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for the commission meeting. We really appreciate it. Let's move on to our next agenda item, which is in attachment A, which is regarding vice chair duties and a proposed addendum to the Commission on the State of Hate policy manual. Again, that's attachment A. It will be put in the chat too, if you want to click on the link. Alec, do you want to review the attachment?
Sure, thank you, Chair Roybal. Let me pop the link in the chat. This agenda item is in reference to attachment A related to amending the Commission on the State of Hate policy manual, which this body adopted in December. There are two proposed amendments, or two main types of amendments within the attachment. I think the first thing that these amendments do is enumerate the duties of the vice chair. If you recall in the last meeting, you all created, excuse me, the office of the vice chair. And so what we did is we took that office and created a set of duties for that position. The second thing that these amendments do is just add the term expiration date for two commissioners, Commissioners Filer and Cuellar.
Great, thank you so much. Is there a motion to approve the amendments to the Commission on the State of Hate policy manual? Commissioner Levin?
I vote to approve.
Is there a second? Commissioner Suthers?
I second.
Thank you. There's been a motion that's been seconded. Is there discussion or questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Levin, did you have a question? See no discussion or questions, we'll move to see if there's any public comment on the matter.
No public comment.
Thank you. Anything else from any of the commissioners? All right, let's move to a vote.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. The motion is to adopt the proposed amendments to the policy manual. Chair Roybal.
Aye.
Commissioner Che.
Aye.
Commissioner Cuellar.
Aye.
Commissioner Dembski. Oh, Commissioner Filer.
Aye.
Commissioner Levin.
Aye.
Commissioner Salcedo.
Aye.
Commissioner Sinar.
Yes.
Commissioner Suthers.
Aye.
Okay, so we have 8 ayes.
Great, the motion passes. Thank you. Let's move on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item, which is our meeting schedule. Maybe the most controversial item on our agenda today, which is to find a regular time to meet. I know that we had, the staff had sent out a proposed meeting time that did not work for some folks. In fact, some of the commissioners had like a hard no that they could not move that time. And so I had a discussion with the staff, and there's really only based upon the feedback from some of you around when you're available, it looks like there is 2 possibilities. That it could be on Wednesday mornings. These meetings do not necessarily need to be scheduled for 5 hours. We can schedule them less. I think we're moving at a pretty good pace today. So it doesn't mean that like 5 hours of the day has to be gone. It could be Wednesday mornings. The only other time, well, so there could be that, and it could be Wednesday, 2nd, 3rd, whatever, Wednesday of the month. The other possibility was Fridays, which I know that can be difficult, especially if they're connected to longer holiday weekends, etc. And then the third possibility was for us to meet in the evenings. Now, these are for our Zoom related calls. Once we have an idea of the community forum schedule, and then we can start to figure out how to plan in-person meetings around the community forum schedule. But since we don't have that yet, we'll regularize our meetings via Zoom. It's also pending the legislature's continuation of boards and commissions meeting by Zoom. That Director Kish, I believe that expires in June or July, correct?
Sorry, which?
The commission's continuing to meet by Zoom or by virtually.
It's hard to know. But yes, as we sit here today, by, I believe, July, we will need to start meeting also in person unless the underlying laws and rules are changed.
Commissioner Filer?
Yes, I have a question. Are the other commissions all meeting on Zoom? And when we do meet in person, would that be in Sacramento? That's it.
So,
Dr. Kish?
Yeah,
I can answer the second part, but
yeah, right now all many state bodies are meeting remotely. We have done hybrid here with our Civil Rights Council, meaning an in-person and remote meeting. I believe that will potentially still be available to us. In terms of the location of the in-person meetings, we can move those. And so our historical practice with the Civil Rights Council, for example, is to rotate between locations in the state that are convenient to those council members. Typically rotating between someplace in Southern California, often Los Angeles, Sacramento, and someplace in the Bay Area. And that's something that we can explore as a group with this one as well.
Okay,
the other thing connected to that, Commissioner Filer, is the work that you and Commissioner Quay are doing around the community forums. If we want to hold a commission meeting in conjunction with the community forums, like probably before or after the forum takes place.
Yeah, that will be great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
For now, though, since we don't have that schedule yet, I'll just throw it out there around, does Wednesday mornings work for the commissioners?
Do you want us to how should we do this? Raise our.
How about put your thumb up if that's if y'all can make that work.
Sorry, Commissioner Roybal, could you remind us the frequency of our meetings again?
We'll plan them for once a month.
Okay.
But if for some reason we don't need to meet in a month, or if the subcommittees need more time, we can always cancel that meeting. But right now we're trying to schedule them on a regular day once a month. Commissioner Suthers?
You actually took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, if we could pick like first or second or third Wednesday of each month, then that tells me what I have to move, and I can do that now.
Great. So I'll just propose, how do people feel about the third Wednesday of the month? So that would mean that for March, the
15th.
Yes. Would be the 15th.
Thumbs up.
Great. Well, that is so much easier than I thought it was going to be. Great. We will plan to meet the third Wednesday of the month at 9 a.m. Is that good for folks? Awesome. Commissioner Salcedo.
Thank you. So I just wanna, I guess, for us to think about June, right? And the work that we need to do. So yeah, because after next month, it'll be literally like 2 more meetings.
Are you referring to the report that the commission?
To the report and everything else that needs to happen. So yeah, just wanted to.
Would you rather move it up to like the second or the first Wednesday?
No, no, not really. I just wanted to remind us.
All right, let's continue then with having the third Wednesday. I know that the staff is having conversations about the report deadline because there are many things that have to happen internally at CRD for that to happen. And I think Director Kisher, Deputy Director Watts, will we be communicating with the commission around that in the near future?
Yes, there's a lot of coordination that needs to happen, as you can imagine, for a report like that. And we will communicate with you all in subcommittees meetings.
So yes, so Commissioner Salcedo, that is on everyone's mind because it is by statute. So I know that the staff is thinking about and working on that, and we'll have a report back for the commissioners very soon. Commissioner Levin?
Could we try second Wednesday of every month? Is that okay with everybody? Just 'cause I might have hard conflicts. That's the only thing.
Oh, okay, let me go back. Second.
I apologize that would not work for me. Could we try the last Wednesday of the month? That doesn't work for you?
We could do that.
The last, well, there's the fourth Wednesday, which is the 22nd, the last, or
Yeah.
the 20th.
So let's do the 4th, because not every
Yeah,
let's do the 4th Wednesday.
so the March 22nd, which I wouldn't go further out. I think that's good. Yeah.
Great.
Commissioner Roybal, what?
Commissioner Suthers?
Commissioner Roybal, two things. What time are we talking about in the morning?
9 a.m. I had proposed 9 a.m.
9 to noon. 9 to noon or 9 to 2?
9 to noon.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Sinar?
Are you asking whether we've got a standing conflict for that time, or whether we know that we will be free over the next several months? Like, I mean, for some of us, we may have a particular Wednesday in May that is not going to work, but otherwise,
I think what we know is that not everyone will be able to always attend. So we're trying to find the best, but trying to regularize the day so that we can actually have some expectation moving forward. So as you look at the rest of the year, but if there is something, if you're going on vacation, if you have a conference that you're attending, certainly you do not need to be at everyone, but we would love for as many of the commissioners to be at it as possible.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great.
Wednesday afternoon didn't work for everybody like it did today?
No, there's not a Commissioner Dansky. The reason that they left today is because they have a standing. They're on the Helix Water Board and have a standing Wednesday afternoon meeting, which is why they would always have to leave early.
So right now that would be March 22nd. Then the next one would be April 26th. That's the fourth one.
Yes.
And then in May would be the 24th.
Yes. We'll ask the staff to send out calendar appointments to everyone with the fourth Wednesday and the 9 to noon time.
Isn't March 22nd Ramadan?
I may be the only one directly affected, and it's not a problem. Thank you. But thank you for mentioning that. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Smart. Thank you. Commissioner Levin, did you have something else?
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh. Great. So our next meeting will be March the 22nd at 9 a.m. Thank you for everyone's flexibility. And like I said, if there's a reason why we don't need to meet or it runs into something, we will make sure to give the commissioners plenty of notice around that. Thank you. Any comments from the staff on that? We didn't ask you if that was okay with you, but is that okay with you?
Yeah, I just want to flag Commissioner Gamsky isn't here right now, so we just want to triple check with her to make sure that works, but it should be fine.
Great. Thank you again, all, for your flexibility. Let's move on to our next set of agenda items. Was there any public comment on the standing commission meeting?
No public comment.
Thank you. Let's move on to updates from the subcommittees. We'll do all the updates from the subcommittees and then open it up for public comment after the last subcommittee report. And we'll start with the subcommittee on data and research. Commissioner Sinar.
Thank you. I will start. And so I'm on the subcommittee with Commissioner Levin and of course with the incredible staff support of Alec Watts, who's just been tremendous. So very briefly, since everything is still a work in progress, we focused in our meetings over the last since our last meeting on two things. First is identifying pressing research gaps when it comes to the prevalence, prevention, and responses to hate crimes and hate incidents. And second, assessing the best models for collaborating with researchers to address these gaps. And I'll just say a little bit more about each of those things. So on the first point, in terms of identifying pressing research gaps, there's, of course, a tremendous amount of research that is already being done on hate crimes, including by many who are on this commission and in community groups as well. What we are doing on this side is just identifying for ourselves what some of the unmet research needs are, and broadly in those three categories. So information on the prevalence and effects of hate crimes and incidents. Second, information on prevention of hate crimes. And third, data research needed on responses and responses to hate crime, including support for those who are affected. And I want to just flag particularly that second point on prevention. We hear this again and again, including from many who have been researching various parts of this topic, that there's an incredible need for information on what works, what is effective at preventing hate incidents and hate crimes before they occur, and including what works outside the criminal justice system. So in terms of things like conflict resolution, education, and a whole host of other things. So on the second point, in terms of looking at different models for collaborating and producing that research, we've looked at different research institutes that work on this issue and that engage in policy relevant research. And I won't go into more detail on that right now, but the big idea here is that we do have funding to support research. So we're trying to do this in a targeted way and in a way that complies with the Commission and our agency's sort of jurisdictional limitations. So I think when we have a moment for folks to weigh in, what would be incredibly useful would be a sense from people of what are some of those key research needs that you are identifying in the work of your subcommittees or in your broader work with communities, because that can really help us target and focus our work. So that's all from me. I'm not sure if Commissioner Levin wants to add to that. Thank you.
Now you know why it's such a pleasure working with Commissioner Sinar. The only thing I want to add is, yes, we're looking at not only these substantive areas, but also what kind of models and folks who would be the best to deliver research on it. So I'm just going to shift for just a second, because I really just want to give a teaser for what I'm going to talk about later, is the data part of this. And I wanted to make sure that the most cutting edge, latest data that we had would be available. I'm going to talk really more subtly about it briefly in my time as a commissioner's statement. But what I do want to say that's really important, is we got in California ignored, and that's important. We had another increase, 32%. We had 1,763 hate crimes, and the FBI did not count 690 of them. Similar things happened in New York and Chicago, as well as other places. But the big headline, my teaser here, so I can get to the other subcommittees that I want to hear so much about, is that this is serious. Each victim, and by the way, not only of crime, but this is what we're counting in this particular data set. Had the FBI had their new system working in 2021, which they reported in the time in between here, we would have had a national record. They also said that anti-Semitic hate crimes went down when our research found they went up, and anti-Asian hate crimes in the United States hit a record and I'll talk more about that in my talk, but these kinds of invisible conclusions of data that are wrong deserve to be called out, if for no other reason, that these communities have not only a right to be heard, but when they come to us and other entities about violence that is impacting their communities, not only do they deserve, but our state and our country deserves the best information. And this past time in the break from our last meeting, the FBI had the most minimal reporting that they've had with respect to participation in quite some time. So we're going to talk about that. I just wanted that opportunity because it's important for these community voices to be heard and to be backed up by the best data available. Thank you so much, fellow commissioners and the public. Talk about it in my statement.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Let's move on to the Subcommittee on Policy Recommendations. Commissioner Che.
Thank you so much. Well, first, it will be actually very brief, and I'll have to make a public apology to Commissioner Salcedo because we were actually not able to meet due to my efforts on the rapid response to the recent tragedies. But what I can share, and Commissioner Salcedo should also chime in as well, is that we are also, would be very interested in learning more about the data sources that we are relying on, because of course we want to be informed by the data, and we know law enforcement data is incomplete and has never fully captured the experiences of our diverse communities. And secondly, I think that this relates to the community engagement piece, is that we have to make an extra effort to reach underserved communities that are the least likely to report and to seek help. So I think it's been very helpful to learn about that. And there's a lot of overlap between and amongst our committees. And so we'd like to also clarify, as we hear from the other subcommittees, their work around policies, especially like around law enforcement. There was assumption that there would be a policy component as well as the other committees. So I'd like to invite Commissioner Salcedo if you had anything to add.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Shea. So yeah, no, I think you just mentioned something that is very critically important, right? About like learning from the other subcommittees and their policy recommendations to see how we are able to include, on the broader, I guess, policy recommendations. So please, work with us. Let's work together and making sure that we, that we provide like really, amazing policies or great policies that will support all of our people. So thank you so much, so that we have that ready for our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners Che and Salcedo. Let's move on to the Subcommittee on Recommendations for Law Enforcement. Commissioner Suthers.
Thank you, Chair Roybal, and just want to say to everyone here, it's just been incredibly, it's a delight to work with all of you. I'm really excited about this. So just let me get started here and say that Commissioner Damsk and I again have the support of Deputy Director Watts, who's just been fantastic. We have established a regular meeting schedule on the second and fourth Thursdays at noon, just so you all know, because I do agree with Commissioner Che that there is overlap. So I just wanted you to know when we are meeting. The first thing that came up at our meeting on the 12th of January was the annual report. So we are very mindful of that. And we had a discussion to try to understand what deliverables might be available for us to accomplish by July 1st. The strategy we discussed in our first meeting was, as you all discussed today, identifying and confirming a common definition, which is not as easy as we think. And I say that as my fellow Commissioner Levin knows, coming from the world of counterterrorism, where every federal agency in the United States has a different definition. This is not going to be easy to do. While I think we made a lot of progress today, we're very, very concerned that all 9 of us agree on what it is that definition is going forward. Second, we want to determine the hate crime reporting status of identified law enforcement agencies in this state, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And then, like everyone else here in your committees, your subcommittees, we want to conduct a literature review to get the relevant information and data that's out there. We suggested that what we're going to have to do as part of the community forums that you all have discussed is probably take this on the road. We would like to recommend that we have slides with consistent branding, probably similar to what we had when we had our orientation in the beginning. There are numerous associations that we all know and have worked with for decades, so we think we'll have an easy outreach in terms of getting to these folks, as well as taking advantage of some of the human rights commissions throughout the state. Last but not least, we are going to probably consider some auditing, and we're going to reach out to California Post, and that was described earlier as a Peace Officer Standards and Training. They offer certified training on this area. ADL does it regularly, and I work with them for years, so we're going to take advantage of that. A week later, we had a meeting with ADL. We met with Ariella Lowenstein, who's the Associate Director for the Pacific Southwest region. She's also one of my instructors on our faculty here at USC. She has some incredible recommendations for us as it relates to data, particularly the ADL Extremism Murder Report for data that comes out every year, the FBI report that comes out every year. But as Commissioner Levin mentioned, this is going to be a very challenging year because they switched data systems mid-year. And because of that, a lot of things are going to be missing. So it's going to be corrected this year, but we have to keep that in mind. Probably one of the most accurate data sources we have right now is published by ADL and the LA Commission on Human Relations. So we'll be taking a look at that. And I wanted you to all know, because I know everybody here is talking about data, just note that the ADL also counts non-criminal incidents as well. So we'll be talking about that. Just a side note, as we had conversations with ADL, they said there was a recent poll, as in the last month, where 30% of the respondents nationally harbor a negative view of Jewish people. We have a lot of work to do. They've never seen numbers this high. There are a number of definitions out there, and I want to thank Deputy Director Monroe for suggesting that we go to IACP. I'm a member, I'll take a look at that. But there are some good definitions out there on not just hate, but also anti-Semitism, because they also differ. The LA City Council has one. We're going to take a look at that. And also the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance has a definition we'll be taking a look at. We've been invited to a February meet and greet as a commission, a meet and greet with Jewish leaders, and I'll get that information to you once I know when it's going to happen. And Ariella Lowenstein is going to be coming to our subcommittee meeting on March 2nd to give us about a 20 to 30-minute brief on what they have and what they do. Our last meeting was this past week, 26th of January. We met with Abby Browning. She's the chief of the Office of the Private Sector in Cali Office of Emergency Services, and she's also the NGO coordinator. She had a great suggestion in terms of our outreach. Many of you are probably familiar with UASI cities. It's the Urban Area Security Initiative. There are 6 of those. I used to manage those years ago when I was in the governor's administration, and they're very receptive. They're doing a lot of work. I believe they're using the federal definition of hate crime, but having said that, it would be an easy strategy for us to reach out and get the law enforcement agencies that we're interested in collecting data, because the largest agencies would be in those 6 areas. So that's all I have. I love working with this group. And again, that regular meeting schedule helps us. And we're not having any shortage of people who've been contacting us saying that they're willing to help us with data. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Suthers. Just a note on your report, the staff is working on a slide template for the commissioners to have, so that you will be able to avail yourself of that very soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move on to the subcommittee on community forums, Commissioners Filer and Cuellar.
Well, I think we have a lot to report on, a lot to discuss. I think both Commissioner Cuellar and myself and Alec Watts, who's been an incredible staff patient member with us, realize that we are going to be intersecting with a lot of the other groups that you commissioners are heading up. And we will have, actually Commissioner Cuellar will lead a discussion after I update you on what we're doing in terms of talking to you about the way we intersect with you and how we want to proceed in that way. So we are looking at the forums that I know we're required to have the 4 forums that's mandated through the legislation. But we also realized that we would think something else would be very important to do as well, which we're calling listening sessions. That would be smaller groups where we could sit down with people and in a more organic way, really hear what's going on and what their needs are. We don't want to make the assumptions that we know what the people of California need and what these forums should look like. We feel like this should be a year of gathering a lot of information to do this correctly and meet the needs based on what the people in our state are saying that they need around the hate crimes and the hate incidents. So we've been working very closely with the CCRD team. Becky's been amazing in assisting us through this process. So has the CCRU team with Marquez, Christina, and Gregory. They're going to be actively working with us to create the listening sessions as well as the forums. I also reached out to Jormana Saba, who works with the city of LA, and she works with religious leaders there on the issues of hate. And we're thinking of having our first listening session with religious leaders representing a variety of groups and sitting with them. Well, I'm going to say Zooming. We're not going to physically be sitting together, but working with the CCRU to create our first listening session, hopefully the end of February. And then using that as a learning tool. Because one of the things that we're very aware of is that this first year is really a year of learning of how these forums, listening sessions will look like, what are the right questions to ask. We've also been in contact with Dr. David Myers at UCLA, who is I think somebody, I don't know, Alec, if you were able to make introductions with other groups. Alec, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. What was the
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if you had made any introductions with the UCLA group, Dr. Myers, to the other research commissioners.
Not yet. Yeah, we have that on the agenda.
Okay. So, and I'm sure Commissioner Levine, you know about David Myers and what he's doing at UCLA. He's got some very interesting research and grants in the way they're looking at hate and looking at it from a variety of perspectives. So we've been doing a lot of gathering of information. We're looking at already curating our first listening session and working with our existing incredible, knowledgeable CCRD and CCRU to help us in making those listening and forums happen. I'm going to let Commissioner Cuellar add on to anything I've said.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. I just wanted to include that we are looking at holding our listening sessions and then learning from those and then having our forums. We want to reach out to the religious leaders in the beginning. So we are asking any commissioners, again, you guys are knowledgeable in your communities on who would be those religious leaders that we would reach out to. So we, now that we're all here together, I would like to throw that question out and see if maybe if you guys know anybody that we should be reaching out to that would be really instrumental in helping us, just hearing those concerns in those areas. Another thing is that we are targeting the 4 different regions in California: Southern, Central, Northern, and probably the Bay Area. I think, we're still looking at other areas. We're looking to doing them quarterly, hopefully quarterly, just depending on how quickly we can get these listening sessions going. Right now, I have drafted a letter that we would like to send out to all of the religious leaders, just introducing ourselves and what the work we have tasked in front of us, and getting them, that's why they're ready for that listening session, and inviting them. So that's kind of why we are wanting to see if you guys have any information on those religious leaders that we should be contacting. Let's see. And then also we are asking.
We're looking for religious leaders located in LA, because we're using LA as sort of our first trial spot.
Thank you. In the LA region. So thank you very much, Commissioner Filer, for that. So that is where we're targeting our first listening session, is going to be in the LA region, and that is a big, diverse region. So we know that in the beginning we may not be hitting all those religious leaders, but we want to try to do our best to get as many as possible, and know that this is just the first of many listening sessions and community forums that we'll hopefully be having. So with that, we have been working really closely with Becky. Becky's been very instrumental, and Marquez and all of that team. So thank you so much for really leading us and how we can have the best session possible. Because again, my thing is, California, all the citizens have been waiting so long for some type of an action, and I want to be able to present them with some type of, something that they can take with them and know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, right? That we are working on something, but at least let them leave that day with resources. And I think Becky will be very helpful in that, because there is a lot of resources that maybe not a lot of the communities know about. So we're really hoping to work really closely with them and really have a really good listening session. And from there, then we'll do more of our forums and target those concerns. So
yeah, and I was going to just jump in, Commissioner Taylor, and say that one of the areas we realize we're probably going to want to do a forum on is around the police, and that intersection with the 2 commissioners who are working in that area, we're going to need to work closely together and seeing how that would look.
Right.
Commissioner Suthers, did you have a question?
If I'm smiling ear to ear, it's not by accident. So first I want to hear that I'm very happy you're working with Jumana. Jumana's family to me, and she happens to also be a neighbor.
Oh, great. Yeah.
The second thing I want to say is I'll connect you with the LAPD Clergy Council, which is the citywide council that LAPD has. Third, the LA Council of Religious Leaders is chaired by a fraternity brother of mine, so I will connect you with them.
Oh my gosh.
And last, I chair the faith-based task force here in South LA, so we should talk.
We should talk. Oh, okay, Alec, how do we do this?
And that's the other thing I know that, now that we've set a date on our meetings, so much work happens in between, and sometimes we need to kind of correlate what's going on. So our thing is, maybe if you guys have any suggestions or anything, mail those to Alec, and then Alec, that's where you got to figure out how you can get that to us. So that's why we know. And again, I know that many of us know there's lots of overlap, lots of different overlap when it comes to, research and things like that. So, if you guys see anything that might help us in our committee, please flag it, and then, just either send it to Alec or wait until we have our monthly meetings.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Thank you, Commissioner Cuellar. Any other comments? I'm looking forward to the forums.
Yeah, we're excited as well. I can't wait to get in there and just really start listening to the concerns and, you know, it's like I said, with everything that's been going on within the past couple of weeks, it just makes our job so much more important. And, you know, that's why, you know, just getting in there and getting it done. So thank you to everybody who's done the work so far, and really looking forward to the rest of the year.
Let's move on to our last subcommittee report, which is the subcommittee on best practices and solutions from other jurisdictions. Commissioner Cuellar, is that you again?
That would be me. So hello, everybody again. So me and Commissioner Che have been tasked with the best practices and solutions from other jurisdictions. I don't have a whole lot to update on this, but know that we have been, we are setting up a strategic plan, and that will be listing our goals, our key action items, and a timeline. Because again, we are all very, we all know that we are up against a deadline. So that is in everybody's thoughts. And so we want to try to do the best we can before that. But we also know that all of us have, we are doing our own research, and there's a lot of existing research out there. So we're hoping to really not reinvent the wheel, but gather all of those different resources. We are meeting bi-weeklies on Fridays. I believe it was 10 o'clock. Commissioner Che, and we're asking the commissioners, as we all start our work in our different subcommittees, just, you know, if there's something, again, an issue that pertains to us, you know, let us know, either sending it to Alec or letting us know at our monthly meetings. I think that was it. I know I have some questions, but that can be for later after. Commissioner Che, if you have anything you'd like to add.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuellar. The couple other things that I wanted to raise is that the first thing that Commissioner Cuellar and I discussed was the scope. So in the actual legislation, it is actually very broad. It's domestic, it's global. So that's something that I think we've taken into consideration. And we also are interested in doing a lit review because, of course, there has actually been a lot written in terms of best practices and solutions. The other strategy is that we are going to be inviting experts because that is allowed. We can actually invite experts in the various fields that we're going to be looking at in terms of responses and strategies that are working. And that's something that we'll be able to report back at our next commission meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Che.
Thank you, Commissioners Cuellar and Commissioner Che. I wanted, before we get to our last subcommittee, my apologies, we have one more subcommittee. Commissioner Sinar, did you want to talk more about the research piece? Did you have questions you wanted the commission to respond to before we get to the last subcommittee?
Right. It was actually just inviting input from other people, others on the commission, that if you have things that are top of mind right now as research questions you're facing in your work, that you know, especially if there are things that you think that there's just, you know, not enough research available on some question, then we'd love to hear that. But I understand that if people can, you know, thinking about things afterwards, you could probably also relay them through staff, through your work later on.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. And our last subcommittee report today is subcommittee on funding. Commissioner Salcedo.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. First, let me just say thank you to all the commissioners who are leading amazing work. So please know that you're appreciated, and thank you again so much. Yes, we were able to have a meeting to really talk about, you know, possible funding needs and how we are going to be able to allocate the funding that could be, or that is available, that could support us in doing our work. So I want to encourage all of us to think about, you know, as we are doing the work, and, you know, the funding that needs to be allocated for the work, for the meetings, for, you know, whatever you think you may need in your subcommittees and all of that. So please, you know, think about that and let us know so that we can make sure that there is distribution of resources for us to be able to do our job adequately. We are tasked with identifying, obviously, as you know, just funding and the needs for this particular commission, and you know, and our strategic plan and how we're going to appropriate and use the funds for this commission, as I mentioned. But we are also thinking about what is the funding needs of this group and how we can also leverage other outside funding. As you know, all of us, we are working with staff to identify how, you know, to use the money that has been appropriated for this fiscal year. And, you know, we're working definitely on drafting a spending plan. And obviously, again, I just want to reiterate, you know, the importance of, you know, for you to help us identify and finding needs, and, you know, and again, for you to really think about what is it that you need, and as you continue to do your work, so that we can make sure that there's a funding allocation for that. And, you know, so like there's obviously a lot that we need to think about and talk about. But in our meeting, this is primarily what came out, and you know, we just want to make sure that, you know, we understand your specific needs so that we can make sure that we allocate those resources for all of our work and do it through allocation of the resources that need to happen. I'm not sure if people have any questions. We're open for any questions.
Commissioner Salcedo, if the individual subcommittees have those to Deputy Director Watts, right?
Yes, please.
Great. So if any of the subcommittees have resource needs, please forward those. This is the first year. We're learning a lot and trying to figure out what we need. So if there are particular resource needs that you have, please get those to Deputy Director Watts, and then the funding subcommittee will look at those and look at what funding is available.
I can think of some things that, I mean, we've been talking about in our community forums, again, places that we can hold our forums at. So again, I wanted to throw that out to the commissioners. If you guys know in your different regions an area that we can hold a forum, please let us know. And if not, then maybe we need to include that in our budget. You know, making sure that we have the funding for adequate space and all those things to hold a forum.
Yeah, so I would say, you know, just allocate whatever you think is that you need in your for you, you know, to be able to do your work. So like, for instance, if you need to rent a space, right, to do those community forums, then, you know, allocate the money, and then, you know, we can, you know, figure that out to see if we need to make that expense, or, you know, or we can reallocate that expense. But I would say I want to encourage for all of us to really think about what are those needs, right? Like Chair Roybal share, like if you have any research needs, right? Any, you know, if you, whatever you think, any support that you think you can use that is going to have some costs attached to it, please let us know, and so that we can make sure that we allocate that into the budget, so that we can also, you know, so we can all be supported in the work that needs to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Salcedo. Any questions about any of the subcommittee reports or discussion? Is there any public comment on the subcommittee reports?
Yes, there's one. It's on agenda item 11. It's from Dylan Hosier from ICANN, Israeli American Civic Action Network. Can one of the commissioners give an update on the current status of law enforcement agencies reporting of hate crime stats in California? Additionally, are there stats collected voluntarily, or is there a mandate for California law enforcement agencies to report to California DOJ? If there is no mandate, should that policy be considered in the future? Number two, what is the current level of participation amongst law enforcement agencies reporting hate crime stats to the state or federal government? And no other public comments besides that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for the public comment. Deputy Director Monroe, I know you covered some of this in your report. Did you want to give any more information about that?
Sure, I can just say quickly, so in California law enforcement agencies are required to report to the Attorney General's office their data, but there is not a federal requirement with respect to reporting data to the FBI for the uniform crime reporting. And I think Commissioner Levin, we have the most recent data on participation. Nationally, it is incredibly low. So not only with respect to participation, but I believe, and I can get back to you on this precise number, but it's usually around 86% of law enforcement agencies across the country either do not report or affirmatively report zero hate crimes. But I will, those are things I'm happy to get back to as a staffer. I can get back to you on and respond, but those are really important questions, and I'm grateful for someone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Could I respond to those just during my statement time so
Sure.
we don't take up more time? I'll try to hit all of that during my statement time.
That would be great. Thank you. So let's move on. Segue, Commissioner Levin. Let's move on to commission member announcements. If any of you have anything that you'd like to share with other commissioners, information, events, other things like that, this is the time to do that. So we're going to go, I'll call on you the order I see you on my screen. And if you don't have anything, that is totally fine. You could pass. And so let's start with Commissioner Chang.
Oh, apologies. I'm sorry.
I said, this is a word. This is, if you don't have anything for this period, you don't need to say anything. You can, it's just if you have anything you wanted to share with the commission members.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. The sound went out for a minute. Yes, I do have updates around responses to the recent incident. And one of my questions is, what is the best way to share that information? Would that be, I guess I would like a recommendation for that.
To share it with the rest of the commission or to share?
Yes. Because it's detailed information and links. Yeah.
Director Kish, Watts, Monroe, do you have a suggestion about that?
Alex, do you want to start or?
Commissioner Che, why don't we, so if it's information that you'd like to share with the public, then, you know, we can share it with the rest of the commission, but perhaps we could talk after the meeting.
Okay. It's
Kevin, yeah, feel free to, Director Kish, if you have thoughts.
If you have, is this information about response that's time sensitive that you would like people to know about right now, Commissioner Shea?
Well, it's just more of an update of what is happening in detail, our solidarity statement between and across communities, and then also how commissioners, general public can share ways that individuals can support efforts.
Yeah.
And I guess this is like an overall communications piece, given the fact that we have to make everything available to the public.
So for things that are time sensitive, certainly you can provide a brief overview right now in your remarks. You can include links or documents in the chat function that become public records.
Okay.
I don't believe there is a restriction on simply emailing information to commissioners if there is no discussion or response. But then thinking for the future, we can also include materials on the agenda. And you can always work with us and our staff to post information on our website that's appropriate for the state to host. So I know that's not a very specific response, but I hope it gets you where you need to go for right now.
That's really perfect. One other announcement that I did want to make is that Stop API Hate is doing a national survey with NORC to better understand what our community knows with regards to their civil rights, where to go, where they would go for assistance and support, as a way to better understand our community education and outreach efforts. I think the California Civil Rights Department should be happy to know that there was actually a high degree of knowledge of your agency's work and function. And so, but I just wanted to share that. We'll have some of our findings, and I hope to at a later point share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Salcedo, any announcements from you?
No announcements at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Suthers.
No announcement from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Filer. Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Commissioner Cuellar.
No announcements for me, thank you.
Commissioner Filer, did you have an announcement?
Nope, sorry, I was muted. No announcements.
That's okay. Commissioner Sinar.
None, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Levin.
Thank you so much. Alec, do you have that one graphic? We'll do more next time, but I think this is important. And to answer why I wanted to answer the questions during this presentation is I'm going to skip down to where it says 2021 hate crime. I'll briefly just give a brief headline on the stuff that we have. FBI came out in mid-December, and they only had a 64% participation rate. Usually they have well into the 90s, 94, 93, 95%. Now, 88% of those who participate fill out a form and say they have zero hate crime. So when Commissioner Che says the law enforcement data is incomplete, she's very correct, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable, because we still have thousands of law enforcement agencies across the country. And while it is not by any means an indicator of the total volume of hate crime that we have, indeed, we have victimization surveys that try to get that, what's called that dark number of crime victimizations. And indeed, Stop API Hate provided an invaluable resource by getting both criminal and non-criminal incidents. The question, though, is not so much is it incomplete. We all know that. It's two things. One, what can we do with the data, and how stable is that incomplete data over time? And it was so terrible with respect to the FBI, so I want to address these issues. Number one, FBI, it's mandatory, and local agencies send data to individual states, and then the states are supposed to send it in. There is a new platform, which is actually a wonderful platform, which will have more information about crimes and more crimes included. But the launch of it was a failure. So we had a time, and this is just, look at this graph here on the bottom, where the FBI said in 2021, we had a decline to 7,300. But if we just included the excluded cases from California, New York State, and Chicago, we would have hit a record. The record was 9,730 in 2001. This would have been 9,809 just with those three jurisdictions. Now, generally, California's data that comes from the AG is accepted in toto. We counted, or California, state of California rather, counted 1,763 hate crimes in 2021. To answer the question, only 73 hate crimes were counted out of the 1,763 that was left out of the FBI's report. So we only had 15 out of 740 law enforcement agencies represented when we usually have almost a complete representation. So 2021 was a bad year with respect to that. So this is why, and I appreciate my friend Errol's statement about the ADL. They do a very good job, but they're limited to anti-Semitic. We are the only ones that do this nationally and do it annually. Here's what we found. In 2021, when we looked at, actually we have more than 19 states, it was about a 21% increase. And our sample of cities was up 35%. And this is where the disgrace is. And we should have righteous anger. There's a 224% increase in anti-Asian hate crimes in 21 cities to 369. The total that we had for the whole country in 3 decades of FBI enumerations was only 356 for the highest year. So just in those 21 cities, we had more than the FBI recounted. Even if they shave some off, there are big problems. Second was anti-Semitic. But bottom line is, we saw, and you can see it on the screen, I'll give more next time, but we saw increases, double-digit increases of all types. And when we correlate this to hate invective online, or non-criminal incidents, or protests that are transphobic, for instance, we can get an idea of trends. So while law enforcement data can be incomplete, it can tell us a lot about trends, and when it's combined and correlated to other data, tells us quite a bit. 2022, real quick, and I just got, right before the meeting, San Jose. The top 10 cities in the United States are actually up 8.3%, because we got San Jose today, literally. Anti-Semitic up, anti-Black up, other groups up as well. Los Angeles was up 13% to 643, even though it looks like a record, it isn't, because it counts victims, while the state and the federal government count events. Events can have multiple victims. But so far, projected data looks like San Diego and San Francisco will be down. San Jose is down a bit. LA up. We've seen a big bifurcation between cities 1.5 million or more going up, and others more mixed. For our total sample for 2022, we're basically flat, 0.5%. So what the data tells us is we're coming off a record. One last thing, and we'll do more next time we get it on the agenda. But what we're finding today is that when these hate crimes go up, they tend to stay elevated longer, and even when they go down, as we saw, for instance, with the anti-Asian hate crimes in the first quarter of 2021, some kind of reignition or catalytic set of stereotypes or invective can rise this up again. Not every increase in a manifestation of hate of one kind necessarily means an increase of another. So violence in the streets sometimes lags, for instance, bigoted rallies. But bottom line is, I think we need to have, at some point, the FBI release an amended version, as they did the year before, when I discovered they left out Ohio and gave it to the Washington Post to run with. So this, in 2021, was really among the worst years ever with respect to participation, particularly over the last 20 years. So we used to have, over the last few years, just in closing, an answer to one of the questions that we had, over 15,000 agencies. In 2021, we had less than 12,000, 11,800. And the highest reporting places, California, New York State, Chicago, the state of Florida, were mostly left out or totally left out. So that's why the FBI put out its own warning. But generally what we can find, especially when we combine this data with other things, like the data from our friends at Stop AAPI Hate, or from National Contagion Research Institute about invective online, we can see that we are in a different era. A derisive and aggressive type of politics is mixing with social media. And we'll get to some of that other data at another point, but I just want to thank my fellow commissioners for the opportunity to present this here first than anywhere else. Bottom line is 5 of the top 6 cities up significantly, but once you go down from there, at least in 2022, much more mixed after an apparent, though unfortunately invisible record, which was set not only with overall hate crimes, but with hate crimes against our brothers and sisters in the AAPI community. And that needs to be heard, because data drives policy, and also these communities have a right to have their stories not only qualitatively and narratively told, but also with this kind of data. And what has happened is in 2021, the FBI not only had a decline in the number of agencies, but they really cut the mountain in half with regard to losing the highest reporting agencies. And the state of California has been left out, for the most part, out of the latest FBI report, which came out in mid-December. And we hope, at least at our center, that they will amend this as they did in 2012 when they had a similar, though much less significant type of mishap with the data, and also as they did in 2020. And just lastly, to my fellow commissioners, Reverend C.T. Vivian, who led the SCLC after Martin Luther King, and Dr. King called him the best preacher, said something that very much touched me. And I feel it about all my friends who are the commissioners now. And that is, we've been waiting for you. Thank you so much for putting your heartfelt efforts at no remuneration to help among the diverse folks in our state. Those are the most vulnerable. My heartfelt appreciation to the staff of the Civil Rights Department and my fellow commissioners, including our chair, who I have such great admiration for. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Just a reminder to the commissioners, we will be, we're scheduling at the next commission meeting a little bit more in-depth presentation on some of this data to share with all of you. So we'll have time on the next agenda to have that conversation and get more of that data that Commissioner Levin will share. So thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Salcedo, you had your hand up. Did you have something?
I mean, thank you for bringing this issue up, Commissioner Levine. And just looking at the numbers, I saw that there was 6% on trans related attacks. And so I think it's important for us to also recognize, right, that looking at the broader aspect, right, comparing trans population with the broader population, right? Like, we are a small community, and so even though we may see a 6%, right, like in comparison in terms of population, right, this is like huge, right? Like, it's a huge number in our community. And so I just want for us to like really think about those things. But also, these are numbers that, are probably the ones that I've reported, right? Like, there are many others who are not being reported or even addressed. And so thank you for bringing this up. And I just want to, highlight that as well.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Can I just interject I'm sorry, can I just interject one quick thing?
Quickly.
There are certain communities, the disability community, the transgender community, the undocumented community, where these numbers are woefully inadequate. We have had dozens of transgender people murdered across the United States. And I was interviewed by someone who had the audacity to say, well, we think that went down a little. There are certain communities where we know we're not reaching. And when we are seeing a rise in transphobic, horrible, violent invective that is not only online, but is on cable television on a nightly basis, this has an effect. And I want to let everyone know that I recognize that there are limitations with data that affect certain communities who are oftentimes attacked the most, but who have obstacles to reporting. In many places, our transgender brothers and sisters cannot even go to the police because police are are sometimes among their victimizers. So we recognize, particularly with the immigrant community, with the homeless, with transgender, and with others, that when we put out this data, I want to be careful because I think Commissioner Che made a very important point. There are some communities we know that this increase that we've seen in recent years in reporting has not yet touched them. And I want you to know, Commissioner Salcedo, and I can't speak for the whole commission apparently, but I can tell you for our center, we will devote every resource to protecting our brothers and sisters and making sure their voices in the transgender community are heard. It is a disgusting state that we are in when there are actually attempts to criminalize those who are allies or family of transgender, particularly transgender youth. And when we talk about intersectionality, among the people that are victimized are those who are sometimes homeless and transgender, who are people who have been rejected by family and other. And we have to make sure that we're not just a place where nerds like me can spit out data, but we serve a symbolic significance of representing that the state of California wants to protect the rights, life, and dignity of the transgender community and our brothers and sisters who populate it. Thank you so much, Vice Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Like I said, we'll be able to get into the data a little bit more in our next commission meeting. I want to move now to public comment for things that are not on the agenda. I want to remind the commissioners, however, that we cannot discuss or act on any items not on the agenda except to discuss whether to include it as a future agenda item. Deputy Director Watts, did you have something?
Yes, Commissioner Roy, just a couple announcements. I'm not a commission member, but there are a few things in the chat that I just want to make sure that we put into the public record. So I'm going to copy and paste some of the useful links that Commissioner Levin has sent to us to make sure that everyone has access to that. And then I also wanted to make sure that we flag Commissioner Che's comment for the subcommittee on research. So I don't know if Commissioner, I'll turn over to you, Chair Roybal, on how to handle that.
And then it looks like Commissioner Sinar responded to that, so. Thank you. We'll make sure to get that Commissioner Che to get that question to the subcommittee. Are there public comment items?
We have a comment from Greg Desire. We can get unmuted.
Hi, Greg Desire again. I want to start by thanking all the members of the commission for your willingness to put in all the time and energy that you already have put in and are committed to putting in on, because we were one of the groups that lobbied for the bill to create the commission, and it's encouraging to see how seriously you're taking it. Introducing myself a little bit more than I did before, I'm the civil rights advocate of the Arc of California, and I coordinate a statewide network of 100 or so organizations around the state working on hate crimes and related issues. And I've been doing this kind of work for about 23 years now, starting when I was a consultant to the Senate Office of Research and followed the Attorney General Lockyer's Hate Crimes Commission around the state for public hearings. And then I did a report that then ended up drafting what became California's hate crimes law in 2004 for the senator who was carrying it. The comments that I have, the main one is that if the main purpose of creating the commission, as far as we were concerned at least, and I think this was true in general, was to get policy recommendations for the legislature and for other agencies that can be counted on. To do that, if you're interested in influencing legislation this year, which I sincerely hope you are, going to have to move very quickly. The deadline for introducing bills is in 17 days from now. And I would hope that you'll be able to look at the bills that have been introduced then at next month's commission meeting And if you are able to come up with recommendations based on your expertise, then to do so. I realize that you may not be able to take positions on all of them, but to the extent you can, that would be, I think, valuable for those of us who are working on those things in the legislature. And I think some legislators would appreciate it. There are 3 bills that have been introduced already that I know of. One more that is going to be introduced in the next couple of weeks that I know will touch directly on a lot of the issues that you've been discussing today, and then it may be 2 or more that I'm not sure about that may or may not be introduced. So they've got a lot of work for the policy subcommittee as well as for the commission between now and then, if you want to try to act on those. And concerning the subcommittees, I know there's no requirement in law that the subcommittee meetings have to be open to the public, but there's also no prohibition that they be open to the public. So I would ask that, particularly for the Public Policy Committee subcommittee meetings for the next month, and although I would hope for all the subcommittees and for always, should be announced publicly and be available for public to participate. You don't have to follow the complete rigorous protocol that you do for Bagley-Keene Act, Open Meeting Act that covers meetings of the commission, but if you can make them public to the extent possible, that I think that would be very useful. I know I would certainly like to be able to attend and participate in the Public Policy Committee subcommittees that are leading up to looking at the legislation that's already been introduced, and much more so than the more comprehensive look at policy recommendations that you'll be looking at for your annual report. And the last point is again concerning the subcommittees. Notice in your policy, in your handbook, that it envisions appointing non-member advisors to the subcommittees. I hope that you would take that seriously, starting next month, to either start making appointments then, and in which case letting people know ahead of time what those appointments are going to be made so they can apply if they want to, or at a minimum coming up with a protocol at the next meeting to make those appointments. And I've taken up longer than my 3 minutes, and I appreciate it. But again, thank you for your work.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you for your work. Do we have an additional public comment?
Yeah, we have a comment from ICANN Action.
Yep. Hi, this is Dylan Hosier, CEO at ICANN. I just want to first and foremost say it's so great to see the commission working together. And I've worked with many of you in my previous roles, and so it's good to see you here again. I just wanted to note that as we're thinking about looking at the listening sessions in the communities, I represent the Israeli community, which is an immigrant community in California. And I would just note that one of the things that we've seen in this community is kind of a focus on the American Jewish community while not looking at the unique challenges that the immigrant Jewish communities face in this state, and many of which are home to the largest communities outside of their home countries. So California is home to the largest Israeli population outside of Israel. With the Persian Jewish community, it's the largest community outside of Iran. And we also have a large former Soviet Union Jewish community as well. And each of those communities face unique challenges that are not typically recognized when we think about anti-Semitism and the various vectors that anti-Semitism can take in our society. So I would just ask that as we look at those listening sessions, that we pay close attention to the various immigrant communities, obviously not just the Jewish immigrant community, but other immigrant communities that might be kind of masked by a more well-established American community that may be present. Other than that, I just want to thank you for your work and look forward to the next meeting.
Thank you, Dylan, and thank you for your work as well and for your public comment. Let's now move to agenda item 19, which is future agenda items. Just a reminder to the commissioners, if you have something you would like to place on the agenda, you can please email me and CC Alec Watts so that we keep a running list of possible agenda items to schedule. So if anything comes up in your subcommittees or or in other ways, please feel free to reach out to me and make sure to CC Alec. But I wanted just to open the floor to see if there are any future agenda items that we could add to that list now. And besides the one we already talked about, which is the more time allocated to a presentation on the research that Commissioner Levin mentioned during commissioner announcements. Any other future agenda items?
I had one.
Commissioner Che.
Thank you, Commissioner Roybal. It would be really helpful to know what the process is for requesting resources, financial resources to carry out the work of our subcommittees. For example, if we have the ability to hire support to do additional research that is not coming from the Research and Data Committee, just more guidance about what that process can look like. I would appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. A short answer to that, we can definitely calendar or that for a future agenda. But if there are resources, as Commissioner Salcedo said in her subcommittee report, if there are things that you need, the answer to your question is yes. And so if you want to forward what those needs are to Alec Watts, then that will, as we formulate the budget, that will be very helpful to know what resources you require. But we can also come up with a better process for that, because I think, one of the things is that we're trying to figure out how we provide some architecture around this commission, because it's the first of its kind around this issue in the state of California. So we're figuring some of those processes out. But we can definitely calendar that for a future meeting. Commissioner Suthers.
Commissioner Roybal, thank you very much. I'd like to just pivot back to Mr. DeGier's public comment about subcommittee advisors. We did talk about that in our subcommittee meeting. We've all got the benefit of decades of relationships with people who are experts in this space, and several of them have stepped up to say, how can I help? So I'd like to just know, what's the process going to be for someone who might fill that role, and how do we implement it?
So why don't we calendar that also for a future commission meeting, so that we can make sure that the subcommittees have the ability to be able to do that and to access resources and talent in the community.
Thank you.
I'm just writing myself a note. Any other items? All right, let's move on to our final agenda item, which is our adjournment. No motion is necessary, but I want to thank all of you for your time and talent and good comments today. And I also want to thank the members of the public for joining us and participating in public comment and commenting on our agenda items. It is a great pleasure to see all of you again, and I will look forward to seeing you again on the fourth Wednesday of next month, which is March 22nd. We'll send out some calendar invites to that. And again, if anything comes up between now and the next couple of weeks around an agenda item, please feel free to email me and to CC Alec Watts so that we can keep that list going. And I want to thank you again for your service, and I'll see you next month. Our meeting is officially adjourned at 4:07 p.m.
Congrats to our chair.
Yes.
Excellent.
Bye, everybody. Yay.
Yeah, goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Have a great
Bye.
week.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.